Live. CASAA live, you guys. Happy Saturday to everybody out there. Thank you, everyone in chat, for joining us. Adam, Mr. Breeze Tones, I see you. Skip, thanks for being here. Homicidal Maniac is here. Green-Eyed Lady. Adrian, Bradley, Addie Tooney is here. Thank you guys for joining us this week. It is officially Saturday. That is CASAA Live Day. This is my favorite day of the week. It's my favorite day, you guys. All right. What do you say we get things started here with some hey, how are yas? Alex, how you doing?
Still cold.
Still cold.
Cold and shaggy.
Okay, cool. Short and sweet. Cold and shaggy.
I'm taking my COVID
Desperate
hair into the endemic phase, so we're gonna rock that as long as people around me can tolerate it.
I'm just excited to see where you're at next year then.
Yeah.
Kristin, hey, how are you?
I'm good. Not much going on. I was supposed to meet my grandbaby this week, but we had some illness in the house. My other daughter was stuck home for most of the week this week. She didn't have COVID, but they don't let you back to school if you have any kind of symptoms of anything. So she was home all week. She was loving that. But I'm hoping next weekend I get to meet the grandbaby, so that'll be good.
Ooh, very exciting. It's always exciting when you get to meet the newest addition to the family.
Yeah, we only had pictures so far, so
yeah, that'll be awesome. I'm excited for you. Yeah, I'm with Alex in it's just been cold. Last week, so Monday here in Batavia, New York, Western New York, here we get all the lake effect snow. Monday it was just like, here's 20 inches of snow all in a day. In like 18 hours, it just dumped 20 inches of snow on us. So my whole week was just like clearing snow, taking care of stuff, and then we had ice and it was just a mess. So yeah, my week was just cold and shaggy. I'm with you, man. I'm desperate for a trim right now, and I had an appointment this last week and I was like, I'm in the snow. I can't come. So yeah, I got to reschedule the trim. So I'm with you in the cold and shaggy department. All right. Well, if Alex is ready, are you ready?
I'm ready.
You look ready. All right. Let's get into some legislation, you guys. All right, Captain, where are we at right now? What do we need to keep our eyes and ears on?
Captain, my captain.
Oh, well, Captain, my captain.
I think we'll go we'll go coast to coast on this one. So we'll start off in Maine with Portland, Maine. I think we talked about all of this last week. So here's some updates. I think I was having trouble with this. I was having trouble updating things this morning, but so we had a first reading of the ordinance this week on the 19th. It was really basic. They really just read the title of the ordinance and said this will come back to us later. So we are waiting for the come back later portion. Yeah. So any kind of, as we noted on our engagement here, written public comment is or was being accepted for this first reading. The next hearing will have actual public testimony, spoken, etc. So in the interim, we have our engagement up. Feel free to use this to contact local lawmakers directly. And I need to, I think there's some links on the agendas and minutes about sending emails for written comment, but I believe that's sort of come and gone. So always good idea to reach out to your lawmakers, and you can use our form to do that. And we'll update this as we get more information about the hearing date. So that is Portland, Maine. The other main issue is going to be the return of the flavor ban. And we had this on our site last year. The bill was LD 1550. That bill, everything gets carried over from odd number years to even number years in most states. So LD 1550 is still alive, but we've got a new bill. This is LD 1693. It's got a lot of stuff in here, and I'll just show you where the flavor legislation is. This is on about midway through page 15, Part D, and this is the ban on flavored tobacco products, which includes vaping. And there's just a ton of other stuff in here. This almost feels like a budget bill. Maybe it is, and I'm just not experienced enough to pick that out by looking over it quickly. But you can see we're in here with a lot of other stuff. Anyway, that always makes it complicated because it's kind of difficult for folks to oppose an entire bill like this. But certainly people's communications to lawmakers asking them to remove this language is helpful. Generally stating that you're opposed to a flavor ban is helpful. And as I noted, and we'll get this updated on the site early next week, we are scheduled for a public hearing on this piece of legislation on February 4th at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. I'm not really sure. I got two different times from the state website. So look for some updates on that. Again, that is LD 1693. And as I mentioned, LD 1550 is still alive and kicking. Moving right along to the middler of the country, Colorado.
I'm sorry, the what?
Middler of the country.
The middler of the country.
Well,
any of you folks living more in the middler-ish area of the country.
I'm going to say that's what I am from now on. I'm going to say I'm not a Midwesterner. I'm a middler.
I'm a middler.
Middlerer.
Well, I created a monster. I didn't arrange these by geography, so I see I have Indiana below Colorado. So if I'm going east to west, then I'm sort of skipping over the middle. And
right, you're not in the middle. You're just more middler.
It's just a little more middle. Colorado's a little more middle than Utah. So.
All right, wait. So where are we doing Colorado? Okay.
Right. I don't even know.
The flavor ban for Colorado, is that what you're doing?
Yes.
Okay.
we're not redesignating any geographic point.
I don't know what you want me to do. I'll share the link. I just want to know which link I'm sharing.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we're doing Colorado.
Okay.
And this is HB 22-1064. Probably just HB 1064. 22 is just the year. So this is a flavor ban. And they redefined tobacco to include nicotine from any source. This was introduced on the 14th. It was assigned to the Health and Insurance Committee. Here is the bill page on your screen. And here is the Health and Insurance Committee. You can follow upcoming committee hearings. We are not in either of these in January. I didn't even look to see February 1st and 2nd. But as far as I know, we're not scheduled for a hearing yet for this. So this is all early alert here. But like we mentioned last week, this is, the state. This has been cooking for a while, I'm sure, but emboldened by the Denver mayor vetoing a Denver ban on flavored products. And now taking it to the state, apparently taking to heart his comment that this should be regulated by the state. So we will update that as we get word about a committee hearing and maybe get an engagement up early so people can start contacting lawmakers, but no big push until we get any real assurances that this is coming to a hearing. Moving back a little bit geographically, Indiana. We noted this on our podcast last week and really no substantive updates. This got a first reading on the 11th, and it is referred to the Committee on Public Policy. If you are playing the vaping legislation home game, you can check back on this to see when and if this bill is scheduled for a hearing. Of course, we'll be monitoring this as well, and so maybe you can just tune into our website and see what's up. Either way, there it is. Nothing has happened since last week. It's just there.
It is.
Oh, I guess I should skip down to Mississippi if we're sticking with the geographic theme here.
Mississippi is fairly in the middle area.
This middle or southerner area.
So, yeah,
it's a little bit more
Middler.
gulfy. Louisiana's a little gulfy.
Yeah.
So this was Kristin included this in our tweets this week, and ultimately the weekly kind of review post, the blog post. A bill has been introduced in Mississippi. Here's the bill. This would include vapor products in the state's existing 15% excise tax on other tobacco products. That's tobacco products other than cigarettes. To be perfectly honest, if this wasn't a tax hike, a new tax, this is sort of in line with that regulation proportionate to risk. Other tobacco products in Mississippi are taxed at a lower rate than cigarettes. But this is a new tax, and there's really no justification for implementing new taxes on safer nicotine products. So this is SB 2062. This was introduced on the 6th and referred to the Senate Finance Committee. Again, like the others, waiting for word on when a hearing will be scheduled, and we'll keep you updated on that one. Now I can get to the West Coast. Oh, wait, no, I should probably go straight up and visit Michigan. Mark Sliss, I believe he's tuned in here today, dropped a note in the chat last week that the tie-barred tobacco legislation is indeed back, and it needs a little bit of work in terms of language. If it doesn't get worked out, they're facing a flavor ban in Michigan. So the bills that we were opposed to last time may or may not be something that we either support or just back away from, because the alternative is a flavor ban. So watching that to see what's happening. Thank you, Mark, for all of the updates. And we'll update our alerts and engagement as we get more information. Okay, now finally, we get to the West Coast.
That was Michigan, right?
That is Michigan. Yeah, I don't have a bunch of bill numbers. There is something I think that was heard last week. 720 was the bill number, and as far as I understand it, that basically included the harm reduction discount or the MRTP tax discount language. So okay with that. Yeah. So I don't have a list of bills for you yet, but all we know is it's back.
Why there's no link in the chat. So I have no link to share, you guys.
Yeah, don't have anything really to add there.
That's the earliest of early heads ups. We don't even have a link for it.
It's pretty early, but I won't tell you.
Yeah, this is like word of mouth early.
So where did I go? I didn't get a page up for Washington, but I can. So let me do that real quick, and then I'll share my screen again.
I pulled you out of there because you switched to a different state.
Yeah, now I don't know. Can you put me back in?
I can.
Oh wait, there we go. It was a view thing. I gotcha. So SB 5768. This is in Washington State. This would direct the Department of Public Health to promulgate a rule establishing a limit on nicotine allowed in vapor products. It would also ban the use of nicotine salts. January 11th, this was introduced and had a first reading, and it was referred to the Senate Health and Long-Term Care Committee. We are not on an agenda at the moment, but if you see this little thing up here on your screen, if you are a Washington resident, you can go ahead and comment on this bill. Washington State is one of those legislatures that actually seems to appreciate citizen engagement in the legislative process, and so they have this handy comment option. And there you go. So Washington State residents only, please. All others, organizations, whatever, you have to send a regular old email. But there's that, and we'll keep tabs on this. Obviously, nicotine caps and banning nicotine salts does not work in the favor of the overall harm reduction and encouraging people to switch to products that they enjoy. So, Washington State SB 5768. The other thing about this bill that I noticed was this would require manufacturers to provide a list of ingredients and product elements which may be inhaled. This list would be managed by the University of Washington School of Public Health. I don't know how publicly viewable these things are. I know other states have sort of attempted to do this. Obviously, manufacturers of any product are going to be a little bit skittish about disclosing, for example, recipes, proprietary information, even though, you know, e-liquid is pretty much all open and out there, and you can make your own at home to mimic or replicate what you're used to in name brands. It's still something that you don't really want the state putting out there. So it's not a matter of being cagey or anything like that. It's just proprietary information. So I'm not quite sure how far that's going to get. It looks a lot like sort of making a big stink about, you know, whether it's dangerous, and we should make sure that people know it's dangerous, and so you got to put that out there, you know, whatever. And I'm sure there's some precedent for this. I just don't know about it, but that struck me as a little extra. So yeah, again, SB 5768 in Washington State, and we'll keep you updated on that. The other one was the tax bill. No update on the next hearing for the tax bill. I don't even have the number in front of me, but that happened last week, and we encourage people to just use the state's form and register your opposition. And as I mentioned last week, the no's outnumbered the yays by at least 100 comments or 100 people who filled out that form. So thank you for everybody who participated and opposed that. Okay. Finally, I didn't get Hawaii on here, by the way, Kristin. So I can't remember what's going on in Hawaii. And
it's an annual flavor ban attempt.
Annual
flavor ban attempt.
I guess we'll come back to that and see where we can get involved.
Yeah, I don't think it's on anything yet. I think they're still talking about it, but there's information. There's a link in the blog post that you guys can check out if you're in Hawaii.
Cool. So we'll update that. California, Sacramento County is moving forward with a flavor ban. We are looking at likely adoption next week. I think that is, let's see, what day is the 25th? On Tuesday. Yeah, so here's the agenda if anybody wants to check it out. This isn't a public hearing. It doesn't look to be public comment. This is likely just a vote and finalizing it. This affects the unincorporated areas of Sacramento County. So if you live in one of those areas and frequent a vape shop in one of those areas, it seems like practically a done deal that flavors will not be allowed to be sold in those places anymore. And in the city of Sacramento, this is, you know, California is doing the thing where the big city and the big county, they harmonize their rules, and whatever, we get an impending public health disaster. So way to go, Sacramento County. Here is the language in the ordinance, just in case you wanted to check and make sure this really is a flavor ban. And that is Sacramento County. If you live in Sacramento County, feel free to reach out to your lawmakers. I don't believe, I think we've had things up for Sacramento County in their Sacramento or Sacramento County in the past, but I don't believe we have anything active at the moment. No. So we don't have anything up on our site for this, but there it is. That will conclude the legislative rundown.
Yeah, you couldn't have said that with any more positivity. Impending public health disaster.
You know, I just calls them how's I sees them.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it is. That's absolutely exactly what it is. All right. Well, you did that briskly, swiftly, and fantastically. I don't know. I'm out of adjectives now. We've made up so many that I can't even think of any actual adjectives at this point. So we will move swiftly along if we're ready for some takes.
Let's do it.
Doing it. All right, me first in the gimmies. I'm going first. All right, here. So this week, my take is going to be about secondhand vaping. Secondhand vaping at home. This is a study published in BMJ Thorax. Secondhand nicotine vaping at home and respiratory symptoms in young adults. There's no actual study here. I'm assuming this is paywalled somewhere, and I don't want to pay the wall to actually see it, but there is a press release for it, which goes into some more detail about this study. But really, what we want to take a look at is not the study itself or the press release. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us do want to take a look at the actual study. If somebody wants to pay the wall and send it my way, cool. But what we're going to take a look at here is secondhand vaping risks don't justify, everything in blue, don't justify public e-cigarette restrictions. This is from the American Council on Science and Health. This is by Cameron English. That study, I believe, came out on like the 10th, and this is a few days later, this commentary on it. New study suggests that e-cigarette users, known also as vapers, may harm the respiratory health of those around them via secondhand vaping. Before we draw any conclusions, the paper has some real-world limitations that restrict its relevance, has some important limitations that restrict its relevance to the real world. So again, he goes through this study. I have not picked this whole thing apart, but I did read his tidbits down here about limitations. And I think this is kind of what we want to focus on. The majority or a majority of the participants, 76 to 93.1% who had secondhand nicotine vape exposure during any of the study waves was also likely to have personal use of tobacco or cannabis products or secondhand exposure to combustible products. So that's a big limitation right out of the gate when you're studying the respiratory health of people who may be exposed to secondhand vaping if they are currently possibly smoking, whether that be tobacco or cannabis products as well. So this, we're going to share this. Kristin, you've got all the links to everything here. So we'll share this for everybody that can read through this, wants to check this study out. And then we've got another expert look at, this is from Science Media Center, expert reactions to that study as well. Professor, I can never say his last name, Leon, is it Shahab?
Sounds about right.
I think it's I've seen his stuff in a lot of these reactions to studies here as well. First, as a purely observational study, these findings cannot establish a causal association. And he goes into a number of reasons why here as well. And then Peter Hajek, who I think a lot of us are familiar with, also gave his reaction and the limitations. While the health risks of e-cigarettes to vapors themselves have been estimated at up to 5% of the health risks of smoking, health risks to bystanders are most likely reduced by a much bigger margin and most likely altogether. This is because e-cigarettes release no chemicals into the environment themselves, only what users exhale, and such exhalation has so far not been shown to generate any toxicants at levels that could conceivably affect the health of bystanders. I was going to bring up a study. I'll get out of this here. I was going to bring up a study that was done as well years ago in a vape shop where they measured levels of toxicants in like a really cloudy vape shop, and nothing came back at any levels that would cause harm to people around. So we've been talking about secondhand vapor, since basically the beginning of vaping. And every step along the way, when someone tries to prove that this secondhand vapor, the PG and VG that you exhale, is going to hurt everyone in your house and in your entire apartment complex, it's just not a thing. It's not a real thing. I mean, secondhand vapor is a real thing, but it harming anyone is most certainly, all the evidence up to this point points towards no. Just points towards no. Yeah, equals zero. I mean, you want to talk about fourth hand vapor risks, though. Now that's some serious grounds for conversation. But really, this is just another wishful thinking attempt at trying to point out secondhand vapor risks to particularly young adults. Again, a lot of limitations in observational studies like this, and all the evidence, better evidence, points to there's just no risk to bystanders. Maybe someday we can bury this myth, but today apparently is not that day. That's it. That's my take. Secondhand vapor, it's just not a thing. It's not a thing that people need to concern themselves with.
Yeah, and the expert, I love how fast the expert response.
The expert reaction came out like the same day. Like Peter Hajax and Leon Shahab's, that was January 10th. Like that study came out the 10th, and they were right on it.
Yeah. So if you guys see anybody spouting BS about secondhand vape, just save that link, put it in a notepad or something, and just copy and paste it.
It's just not a thing. I mean, we can get into secondhand smoke studies and how blown out of proportion most of those are, and inaccurately reported most of those are. Again, Velvet Glove, Iron Fist, fantastic book. What is it? The Rediscovery of Tobacco, Jacob Greer's book. Jacob Greer, we had on the show talking about that book. The secondhand vapor is another, or secondhand smoke, excuse me, is another one. Really, you're talking decades when it comes to serious harms from secondhand smoke. You're talking about people who live with someone who smokes heavily for decades. A lot of research in that field shows, when you're talking about smoke outdoor bans, somebody smoking next to you, your potential risk is basically zero. We talk about vapor. I mean, the risk there is just zero. I don't want to say zero because nothing's absolutely zero, right? But I mean, it's so minusculely marginal that it's just not there.
Cool.
Anyway, that's my take. That's my take. I didn't want to ramble on about secondhand smoke too, but I guess I did.
You're opening up a can of worms.
I know, man. That's why I'm gonna close the can. I'm gonna close the can and pass my take on to you.
Cool. So I'm going second, and for my take this week, I decided to do kind of a twofer here. This is the New Tobacco Wars, which is a presentation by Clive Bates at e-cigarette summits, last year's e-cigarette summit. Highly recommend everybody go and watch this. It's not very long, and Clive Bates, as always, does an excellent job of articulating the points here.
And shout out to Michelle Minton for putting that on my radar because she tweeted about it. And so
yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. I didn't write that in my notes, but thanks, Michelle, for sharing that. One of the things that I'm sort of keying off on here is Clive stating reasons for optimism. And as Apathy Miller noted earlier in the chat, even just being kind of a basic advocate in favor of THR is very stressful. It is demoralizing and just on a daily basis, absolutely frustrating and stressful and depressing to see people trafficking in innuendo and lies designed to mislead people about safer alternatives to smoking. But especially those of us who've been doing this for a while, we have to grab onto any little nuggets of hope. And some of that is, I think, sort of baked into the products, as I think Clive notes. He makes a comparison to the music industry in this video, and he's sort of going from analog recordings, your records, your tapes, and so on, and then the evolution of the medium in using CDs, and then streaming and the cloud. And as technology evolves, the user experience improves. And so now, we can take our entire music library on a little brick in our pocket and listen to it anywhere. I don't know if they still do it, but you used to be able to, like, when you'd call for an Uber, you could request certain music on their Spotify. depending on, I guess, the driver and whatever services they had signed up for. So all of that to say, at each stage of this evolution in technology for music, the consumer realizes a benefit. And the same thing is happening broadly in the tobacco space. So as the technology improves, we are now capable of producing on a massive scale products like e-cigarettes, like nicotine pouches, like Swedish snus. We've been producing smokeless tobacco for more than centuries. But the evolution of these products to the point where people can now consume nicotine with very little fear of dire health consequences, consumers realize a benefit, and over time, just like cigarettes are going to go the way of the 8-track. That's the way to look at this. Whether policymakers are on board with it or not, this is what will happen. The market, the consumers, we're going to be the ones making the decision, and policy needs to catch up with this to maximize any public health benefit. And right now, it's just not. But we are headed in that direction. It's just a longer term thing, and I've been trying to kind of remind people about this for years. When people first come to vaping and they get all excited about quitting smoking and how this is a godsend and this has revolutionized everything, and then they find out that everything's sort of against them, people come into advocacy expecting immediate changes, and this is not the case. It's really not the case with any issue. It's very difficult, I think, to kind of separate ourselves from all the action and activity that we see on TV. If you hear about an issue on the nightly news, and all of a sudden it's there's a bill in Congress and it looks good and it's going to pass and the world is going to change, just keep in mind that people have probably been working for a decade or more on passing that legislation. And so even with things like the Build Back Better plan, all of the progressive dreams that are being included in that, those policies have been developed and debated at the local and state level, and now it's made it all the way up to the federal level for probably more than a decade. So,
well, marijuana, the war on drugs started like in the 70s with Nixon, and so basically marijuana is just now finally being legalized in places. So it's just how long that took.
Yeah, arguably even earlier than that. This happened in the 30s and 40s.
I want to say cannabis prohibition was in the 20s, 1922. Okay. I mean, we outlawed opium in 1909. The smoking of opium. I mean, the war on drugs is June of 1971 is when he declared the war on drugs.
That's what I meant.
We've prohibited and whatnot with drugs long before that. We just militarized our police force against them and called it a war,
Yeah.
So, and the same is true for the people who we sort of identify as opponents in all of this. They've worked for decades to get tobacco policy where it is today, no matter how destructive it is turning out to be with regard to the access to safer products. They fought for decades to get there. And so it's really important to take, a longer view of progress in order to, I think, kind of keep ourselves in the game, to keep getting out there and advocating for what we know is true. And so, my other note about this is, ultimately, I don't actually believe there are a lot of policies. I mean, some really basic stuff, right? As a consumer, I want to know that the products I'm consuming aren't going to kill me when I use it, and that things are clean, made in a clean sanitary facility. Man, we got a lot of spammers in chat today.
I'm getting them.
Good job.
Get them, Kristin.
So anyway, really, if people are allowed to decide for themselves, I think eventually, as I mentioned, cigarettes are just going to go the way of the rotary dial and the 8-track cassette, and people will make the decision to switch to safer products. Similarly, the full title of my take here is The New Tobacco Wars and the CDC of Alley Lie. And I wanted to highlight Mark Gunther's post on Medium this week, going over the fact that, again, we all know this story, right? CDC was the late organization to acknowledge that this was coming from vitamin E acetate. But the CDC is still sticking to this kind of misinformation game. Their frequently asked questions about the lung injury cases has not been updated to specifically point to illicit THC products. It still is confusing and throws in vaping and e-cigarettes as generally the cause. And I looked through this FAQ and didn't really, I don't remember seeing things about, that these products are purchased on the underground market. It just kind of talks about all the harm and danger. We got questions about flu season. I'll tell you what, if you're afraid of getting sick, switch to vaping. How about that? There's some good advice for you. So, the sort of larger discussion here, and I don't know how much of this I'm sort of superimposing on Mark's coverage of this, and how much of this is certainly my own opinion. And I know that, a lot of us share this opinion. Getting back to that sort of taking the longer view of progress, we also kind of need to look at the longer view of consequences. The CDC is supposed to be an organization that we can all trust. They are the agency that alerts the nation about communicable diseases, for example, COVID-19 or Ebola and other things. And so in that role, the CDC has to maintain a level of credibility that I think it should be rather unimpeachable. They're not doing that with regard to tobacco products, and certainly the public's confusion about how science works and how science is updated regularly, and in the case of a pandemic, updated frequently. The changing advisories coming out of CDC have been confusing and have led to a level of distrust that is arguably dangerous. And it's hard to defend the CDC when I guess at least one of their, centers or a department within the organization is openly misleading people about safer alternatives to smoking. I would love to be able to be in that camp of saying, yeah, I trust everyone at CDC. I have the utmost respect for what they're doing. And I can't do it because the agency as a whole allows CDC tobacco free to continue misinforming the public about safer alternatives to smoking. And this is dangerous, and there are long-term consequences for this. As a remedy, I would say this entire FAQ needs a rewrite, and it needs to pay attention to the actual source. As it reads now, just picking apart the language on a word-by-word kind of basis, there is the suggestion from the CDC that vitamin E acetate has actually been used in nicotine e-liquids. This is categorically false. Otherwise, you'd call that a lie. And we've certainly talked to people. I remember at the beginning, or near when the lung injury cases reached kind of a fever pitch. I remember speaking to somebody. I was on their podcast about, and asking someone who manufactured e-liquid at one point. We've established this. There is absolutely no benefit to adding vitamin E acetate or any oil-based liquid to an e-liquid. Consumers don't want it. Manufacturers don't save money on it. It doesn't improve the product quality. It doesn't even work with devices. There is absolutely no point in adding it to nicotine e-liquids. And yet, the CDC, the organization that is supposed to be the most credible authority in all of the land about communicable and non-communicable diseases, continues to fan the flames of this lie that this ingredient may have ended up in nicotine products. It didn't. So, sorry, it's like looking. I got this hair.
You have this rooster tail happening in the back, and I think it's stellar.
You just threw him off.
I set myself up for all this derailing.
I didn't mean to derail you. I just want to know how.
Oh no, I did it.
Kind of amazing.
I own it.
I'm jealous because I'm bald. So I'm jealous of your rooster tail.
Anyway, back to the CDC, these bastards. This entire FAQ needs a rewrite. The CDC needs to come out. This is kind of in line with what Mark Gunther is suggesting here. We need this agency to come out and clearly state, I mean, forcibly state, that this came from illicit THC cartridges. It was not found in nicotine products. These lung injuries are not the result of nicotine vaping. The data bear that out. People know it. More people need to know it. And we need to correct the misperceptions of risk, which is something that both, I think, Mark Gunther and Clive Bates have noted repeatedly. We have all been saying this for probably a decade now or more, that the risk communication around these products is wrong. And agencies like the CDC have a vital role in aligning the public perception of risk with reality, as opposed to what they're doing now, which is fanning the flames of hysteria and moral panic and not serving the public interest.
Right.
That's
I mean,
that's my damn
we had
take.
what at the peak of that, or at the kind of the conclusion, because once FDA kind of put out their thing and we started spreading it around, we didn't see a whole lot more after we kind of hit that peak. It was like a few thousand people with lung injuries. 68 or 70-ish people died as a result of this. But when CDC isn't making these corrections, and during the height of that, the information they were putting out was to the wrong consumers. You had people who were using nicotine products, e-cigarettes, and thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to kill me, went back to smoking. And then you had people who were out actively buying these products that were killing people, who were not getting informed, who were thinking, no, this product I'm buying is fine. It's e-cigarettes I need to stay away from. And going about their day using this product. And yeah, I mean, it's just a huge, massive mess.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, if I'm somebody working at a prestigious government agency like the CDC, I would want to know that, so, you kind of got to do the postmortem on the reaction to this issue. And so one of those questions, I think, has to be, how many of those 68 people who died could still be alive if the CDC took action sooner, roughly around the time that FDA did, and clearly warned people about illicit THC products. And this bears repeating, because responsibility is also on the media for this. When the FDA updated their guidance to their advisory to consumers, which was specifically do not buy THC cartridges, and generally don't buy, e-cigarettes also, but don't buy THC cartridges from informal sources. This is clearly pointed to where the issue was. On that day, the NBC Nightly News covered the story about the lung injury cases increasing, but failed to mention FDA's updated advisory. They stuck with the CDC on this. They had been reporting on what FDA was doing until this point. And as soon as FDA strayed from the narrative, NBC stopped reporting the news. So it's ridiculous what has happened, and I think that people at CDC should probably be held accountable, like everybody else would be, for their misstep. I think that's giving them a little bit more credit than they're due, but for neglecting to update this very important information to the public in a timely manner that may have saved lives.
Yeah, I agree with you. It absolutely would have saved, or at least it would have lowered the rate of injury, just the overall, number of people affected.
So we have two questions. Like, Skip, I did see you, so I'm going to come back to your question, but I had a question, and Ian pretty much wrote it out too. Is their position based on the self-reported instances of EVALI where they reported only using nicotine vapes? And that was kind of my question too. How do we, because I keep seeing this where people are like, EVALI was, it was, illicit THC, it was vitamin E. Well, that doesn't explain the whatever percentage that reported that they only use nicotine vapes. Now, I know rationally we're all like, well, yeah, they just lie, but they keep using that. And I don't know what to use as an argument to that other than, well, they must be lying.
Wait. Before we go on, first of all, I want to correct, I try to correct or massage the language here a little bit. That 16% of people who We don't really know what they were using. Rather than pointing to them as liars, I would say they opted to not disclose their substance use for very
obviously,
obvious
say it
reasons.
in a better way. I've never seen
Whether,
it.
I mean, I think it's really important here because we're talking about the CDC lying, whereas the people who were victims of this contamination, who withheld information about substance use,
reluctant to disclose their drug use.
Another good way of saying it. Yeah, I mean, it is a result of state and federal policies against drug use,
right. And I usually make that point.
and highlights a lack of trust in their doctors. This information is supposed to be confidential, but a lot of people, particularly people who use drugs, are a bit scared of disclosing that to their
doctor. For fear of incarceration, for fear of losing their children, their homes, jobs, whatever it may be. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's what I was going to point to, was directly to drug policy and poor drug policy.
And then the other question was from Skip. She said, would it do any good for all of us to print the Mike Pesco et al. Letter to the CDC and mail it to our lawmakers and ask them why the CDC is misleading the public? Do you remember that letter that came out? I think she shared a link. Did you share a link in chat with that, Skip? She said she was going to share the link.
I mean, sure. Timing is always good. If it coincides with opposition to a particular bill, that's probably a good idea. Always good. If you see articles in your newspaper, you could always share that it's not really a letter to the editor, but certainly sharing Mike Pesco's letter with newspaper editors, news sites editors, and urging them to correct any misinformation that might have been reported in an article. There are still people. I mean, this is, the really horrible thing about this is that, it's been a year, and people are still pointing to these lung injuries as an established consequence of vaping nicotine in committee hearings as part of legislation. It's written in preambles to bills. It's all but codified. The lie is all but codified.
They keep using it over, and then they're still using it in studies and things like that. Green Eyed Lady said they were dual users, nicotine vapes and THC vapes. Yeah, most of them were, but there's a small percentage who have claimed they only use nicotine products, and that's the one people keep pointing to. But I suppose, an argument to that just occurred to me because when you just said it's been a year, and the cases have dropped off dramatically to almost nothing, whereas vaping hasn't dropped off that much. So if any nicotine vaping had anything to do with it, we'd still be seeing a significant number of cases today. So there's your argument.
Heavily isolated here. Vapor products are used around the world. I mean, there's so many things that debunk this, but you're right in the fact that CDC clinging to this lie, it's not doing anyone any good.
No.
Yeah, and you just
and as we've heard from people like Cliff Douglas, former president of the American Cancer Society's Tobacco Control Center, he had watched his niece go back to smoking, his niece and her boyfriend go back to smoking because of what the CDC and others have been promoting, the lie that they've been promoting. It's and again, kind of taking that longer view, trying to be optimistic and sticking with all of this. We're going to have more Cliff Douglases. We're going to have people in positions of authority and power who see their children or their friends go back to smoking, or they're going to hear an opinion about smoking that just doesn't jive with what we know about risk, and that will inspire some of these people. It's a shame that we have to wait for that, but this is how things work. I guess we're all here trying to encourage that to happen faster, and hopefully we will be successful and people won't have to die early needlessly while all of these alternatives to smoking are available. But I
want to see what kind of media coverage it gets if the CDC ever does not do a 180 on this. You think it'll be? There won't be a press release.
There won't be any expose. New York Times isn't going to correct their reporting
as
on
quietly as possible.
it probably won't even be a note on the website saying this site was updated to more closely align with reality.
This is a big if they ever do anything. Yeah.
With reality.
One of these days, somebody's going to stumble upon the EVALI coverage on the CDC website and be like, "Oh, they updated. It doesn't sound so crappy anymore." That's it. That's what it'll be.
The thing that makes me crazy is it's still. I mean, if you go to our blog post, we tweeted about it too. An article that just came out about head, neck, and what is it? Head and neck and oral cells from vaping having possible risk of adverse effects from it. And in that study, they point to all the lung injuries that happened, and it's like that's a study. I mean, it's being made canon in our, is that the right word for it? I don't know, dogma, whatever you want to call it, in actual research, and it's crazy that is not being changed when researchers who are supposed to be specializing this can't even get it right, because they said, these lung injuries were caused by e-cigarette use. They didn't even say vaping in this instance. While they like to conflate vaping with e-cigarettes, like it's all the same thing. But yeah, they specifically said these lung injuries from e-cigarette use, not from vaping. And so, yeah.
So anyway, I've kind of strayed from the original point here, but just to put a pretty bow on all of this, stick with it, guys. I know this is stressful. I've been trying to manage burnout for a few years now, and it really is helpful to take that longer view of essentially the truth will out, and we may not get that sort of sense of justice. Holding people at CDC and all of the body parts groups and Campaign for Tobacco for Kids and Truth Initiative and lawmakers accountable for actively promoting misinformation. But the point here is that over the longer term, it is a lot more clear to see that policies will align with the benefits of promoting tobacco harm reduction. And we will all ultimately, we're already on the right side of history. It's just someday we'll realize that in being able to promote safer alternatives. So there you go. And now on to your take, Kristin.
Really quick before I go, I just want to this will be a good one to share my screen on. Wait, I gotta get back over here. I get so lost in all of this. Okay, share screen, that specific window, that one, share. Okay, so you guys can see that, right?
Yep.
This was that same article that I was talking about, that with the head, neck, and oral cells problems. And I'm surprised more people didn't note this. So I want to just put this out there again. Of note, most articles in this systematic review found cigarette smoke to be significantly more toxic to head, neck, and oral cells than e-cigarettes. I mean, that's a systematic review of studies that finds that cigarette smoke is more toxic. And that's we need to pull these things out and keep making note of them, because it's incredible that that's not what's going to be in the news. What's going to be in the news is the first part.
Yeah.
That, toxicity was statistically significant, when they were exposed to e-cigarettes. And that's what you're going to see. And that's just so frustrating. Okay. Mine here. Okay. So I wanted to talk about VLN, very low nicotine cigarettes. A lot of people saw it in the news that the FDA authorized marketing the products that help reduce exposure to and consumption of nicotine. And I wanted to clear up some stuff, because I see a lot of misinformation coming from vapors or misunderstanding about things. And I see misinformation coming from the other side, where people are saying, oh, they can make reduced harm claims and say that they're safer, which really officially they can't. It's a reduced exposure thing, which is really ironic, because that's probably one of the few exposures in smoking that's not a toxic thing that could kill you. It's the other stuff, the carbon monoxide, which I think is a huge thing that gets ignored a lot, the particulates, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like saying, oh, these cigarettes help reduce exposure to air. It's like, so it doesn't matter. But what I really wanted to talk about was that, well, basically, one of the other things that I also see, so it's actually, I want to backing up. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, my brain. Okay, so filter cigarettes as a modified risk tobacco products, which help reduce exposure to and consumption of nicotine for smokers who use them. So just bear in mind, it's not the same thing as being safer. And you're seeing a lot of people who are coming out and saying that this is a good thing, or it's a bad thing. I mean, on the other side, in all honesty, tobacco control is not thrilled with this being approved either. I think they'd rather just see a blanket ban on nicotine in e-cigarettes, or very low, or have it be applied by the FDA. And that's something that's been long coming. But just bear in mind that I've seen people claiming it's like, oh, now they can say they're safer. No, they can't. They technically can't. But there is a valid criticism that people the general public will stop and go, oh, these have a modified risk. Well, actually, most of them probably won't even hear it, but they will see on the package, because now they're allowed to put on the package, this reduces your exposure to nicotine. And we know how many people, based on surveys, think nicotine is the main thing that kills you when you smoke or use tobacco. So it's really important that we keep an eye on them and make sure that they're not doing that. And there is some concern about that, because one of the studies, so the other thing I saw was a lot of people are making claims about what's going to happen when people use these. If the FDA decides that they're going to push this, and keep in mind too, this was kind of a thing that was built into the Tobacco Act of 2009. Congress, in a way, assigned this to the FDA. They said you can't force them to have zero nicotine, but you can make it as low as you want, is essentially what they said. And it was sort of built into the act that they wanted to see this happen. And a lot of that was based on some studies that came out in the probably the late 1990s. And they were saying that their current studies show that people who use these cigarettes that were either very low nicotine or denicotinized, I have a hard time with that word, showed that they were actually a benefit. And I'm going to get to that, because I see a lot of people responding to this as being, well, people are just going to smoke more. They're going to compensate, and they're just going to smoke more. And hasn't really played out in the studies. And so it's been a valid argument from the other side that, well, studies show that they don't compensate. So that's not a good argument to use, because they really don't. The other thing is, well, this isn't going to help people quit. Well, really, if you look at some of the early literature and the early articles and arguments for this, it wasn't so much about getting current smokers to quit. It was about making sure that youth who try these products won't get addicted. So that's just a small little distinction that you have to keep in mind when you're making arguments about this product. And I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say on that. So yeah, there is no evidence that people will smoke more. Almost all the studies, all the literature, and I will share all the links to all of these in the description, the studies that I came across, they're right. Most people don't overcompensate, but there's a caveat to that. There's a limitation to that, and I will get to that in a second. But this was just real quick, showing that public misperception of very low nicotine cigarettes being less carcinogenic. And 47.1% of smokers believe that smoking VLN cigarettes for 30 years would be less likely to cause cancer than smoking current cigarettes. Okay, so that's a misconception. Why this is very important to know is that other studies, and again, I will share links to this, but other studies, let's see if I can find it here. The one that shows, try to put it in my notes so that I could find it fast. Here's one. This one is from 2000. I'm not sure, I didn't save the date on this one. This one here. So it's important that they think that people will, the theory is smokers, because they don't compensate, there are studies showing that they start to smoke less. So they use that as a some people might quit, and then you won't have people starting. Well, part of the problem from what I found looking at most of these studies is that there's about a 30%, a lot of them are really small too. Like some of them have 16 subjects and people are using this as evidence. But, if you look at this one here, they came up with, let me see if I can find it. They had 752 participants. The ones who were assigned the VLNs smoked less, which means it reduced their toxicant exposure. So if you are smoking less, there could be an argument that you're not getting as much toxin, but that completely counteracts if you go on any website for tobacco control and say, hey, if I just cut back down to a few cigarettes, it's all no safe exposure, no safe exposure, no safe exposure. So you kind of have to wonder, but then that's the convenient argument when they want to say, oh, well, look, they're reducing their cigarette intake. The other problem with this one was, even though they had 752 participants, only 39% of the participants actually finished the study. So 61% of the people quit, so got no benefit from these cigarettes at all. And they're not going to tell you that. They're only focusing on the 39% who kept up with it. And that's a major problem with this is what are they going to do? Are they going to keep using these cigarettes or not? The other thing is that, and I'm just going to get out of this because I don't want to just keep showing, oops, you don't want to see that. Why did my calculator come up? I got to pull up this. Stop sharing. The other thing is that on average, yes, they did smoke less. From most of the studies that I saw, people who were using the very low nicotine ended up smoking less cigarettes. However, it sort of maxed out at 30%. They cut them back by 30%. And that's not quitting. That's not quitting. It's like, oh, it looks promising. They're going to quit 30%. Like if you went to your doctor and said, hey, I cut back on smoking by 30%. Isn't that great? He'd look at you and be like, no, it's got to be 100%. All the anti-tobacco groups, same thing. They'll tell you that no safe level of smoke and cutting back by even 50%. If you only smoke a half a pack a day, they'll say pretty much it's the same risk. It's not a significant difference in risk. I'm not saying I agree with this, but I'm just saying that that's what they're going to say. So it's right there on the line. It's not as being truthful, but not really, because they're not really stopping people. The studies do show this, but it's a little song and dance with it. And the fact that people think that, and like I said, they're not quitting completely. So let me see. I got to find my notes here. So vaccine, I did that one already. Okay. And then 2 or 3 of these studies that I'll share the links again, that were often cited in the other studies, found that or mentioned alternative. They specifically mentioned alternative safer products, or ENDs specifically, electronic nicotine devices. And they say that, if you get rid of the nicotine, they'll go to those devices. And here you've got studies now who are saying, okay, these are safer devices. These are preferable device, yet they're banning those things. So if they can't get these alternate nicotine products, or they just don't want to use them, so another question would be, what are they going to use instead? And another point that came up is, and in the beginning, one of the studies I found that was often cited as being, this has been, science behind this and stuff. It was from 1998. And they said the objective was to assess the feasibility of reducing tobacco-caused disease by gradually removing nicotine from cigarettes until they would not be effective causes of nicotine addiction. And specifically said required that the addictiveness of cigarettes be reduced within 5 to 10 years. And we know now that they're just saying, shut them off, cut them off, and it was specifically to make it easier on people who currently smoke to gradually wean down to these, your own cigarette, your own brand would eventually just, kind of fade away. And they even mentioned back in that study, potential problems is compensatory over smoking, black market sales, things like that. So they said those could really be a risk, and nobody wants to talk about that. And one of the ones that they, and then one of the ones that actually cited that's more recent from 2015, backed away and said, oh, no, we don't really have to do it like that. But they did talk a lot about recommending that they go ahead and do this as developing and implementing a nicotine reduction policy. But they quoted Mitch Zeller as saying in 2013, anyone who would ponder the end game must acknowledge that the continuum of risk exists and pursue strategies that are designed to drive consumers from the most deadly and dangerous to the least harmful forms of nicotine delivery. And this is in these studies. Our ability to transition smokers to the use of less harmful nicotine delivery systems would be greatly improved if the makers here. Now get this. Now remember, this is 2013 before FDA actually started doing anything. And I believe this is before Mitch became director of the FDA, which is also really interesting.
Center for Tobacco Products. He was not FDA director. He was
Tobacco
Center for Tobacco Products.
FDA Center for Tobacco Products. My apologies. Yeah, that's what it says. I just didn't finish reading the words. Our ability to transition smokers to less harmful nicotine delivery systems would be greatly improved if the makers of products such as e-cigarettes, this is a quote now, that reputedly cause less harm would seek FDA approval for them, providing evidence they are safe and effective as smoking cessation aids, and that they yield benefit at both the individual and population levels. And he doesn't see that he's holding the bar way too high when you're trying to compare it to cigarettes. I mean, they just don't get that. They want to see it as smoking cessation devices, not as alternatives. But I thought that was really interesting. And, but so many have been denied. And now what? And another quote I thought was interesting from that was, if people smoke the nicotine but die from the tar arising from tobacco combustion, why? And again, they always say the tar, but carbon monoxide has horrible effects on your body. And they seem to not think about that. Why not disassociate the two? We are increasingly convinced that reducing the nicotine content of combustible tobacco products would undercut the motivation to smoke, that young people who continue to experiment with cigarettes would not become dependent on them, and that adult smokers would either get their nicotine from another source that is markedly safer or quit using nicotine altogether. And what my note on that was, if people are seeking smoking just the nicotine, okay, something that has been countered in other studies, which I'll get to in a second, plus the inefficacy of NRT, because we know NRT doesn't work. If it was just about the nicotine, they would work much better. We need to ask, why are they seeking that nicotine? Does it have some benefit for them? And if they can't get nicotine because of all of this, will they turn to something else to self-medicate? Now, there was 2 other studies that I thought were really interesting when it came to this, and that'll be the end of it. But they mentioned, okay, that was that one. Where is it now? Oh, no, I can't find it. They mentioned that, because I said the reference of, oh, no, I got to find it. Basically, it was, because they found that people didn't quit. And there was a study, let me see if I can find that one real quick. There was a study that looked at they weren't looking at to see if the nicotine would help them quit. It was, what would they do if, I know I can't find it. There's a whole bunch of really interesting too, like menthol people who smoke menthol didn't do so well when the nicotine was lowered. They did not quit, and they had a big no, I can't find it. Oh, and it was really
well. While you're looking for this, I'll just jump in and note something that was brought up in chat, and something I've been thinking about with regard to the very low nicotine content cigarettes. Neff made the comment about how vapor products have that sort of step down process built in already. One of the ways I wouldn't mind seeing VLNCs marketed is just disclosing nicotine levels, which is prohibited. But being able to note the nicotine content on cigarettes gives consumers that option of saying, hey, wait, yeah, maybe nicotine is keeping me coming back for cigarettes. If I can choose a lower nicotine cigarette, maybe that puts me closer to quitting. I would appreciate, as a consumer, I would appreciate that. But
right.
it's still, this idea of the top down, forcing people to smoke very low nicotine cigarettes. And as others have mentioned in the comment, I think Janine Timmons brought up, or maybe it was Green Eyed Lady, talking about how the focus being all on prevention and not actually benefiting people who currently smoke.
You can just die.
When we talk about how we became addicted to smoking, it wasn't instant. This is one thing that baffles me about this whole non-addictive level of nicotine. To me, it's total bullshit. I have used products that don't contain any drugs. I've used them habitually with not great outcomes. But it became habitual, and I am arguably addicted to that behavior or that product without drugs. So you can develop an addiction to smoking without nicotine at all. I mean, I'm sure there's data out there showing.
This is what this is. This is what this is, actually. This study was actually looking at, and I actually had to read this so many times, and I read it out loud to my husband because I'm like, am I reading this right? What am I reading? And reading the aims of the study was really important because it says sensory motor stimuli associated with tobacco smoking influence smoking behavior. However, current research is focused most exclusively on effects of brief laboratory-based exposure to smoking-related stimuli. Okay, they're trying to talk about the other aspects of smoking besides nicotine, because it says the purpose of this experiment was to characterize the effects of smoking stimuli delivered in the absence of nicotine. So not trying to see if people quit, but what happens to their smoking behavior. Are they going to compensate? Are they going to do all that? It says daily denicotized cigarette use declined immediately by 1.7 cigarettes a day. Okay, so here's your proof that it's not, people aren't overcompensating. How much they smoke went down, and it declined by another 3.5 cigarettes over time. Participants smoking denicotized cigarettes also demonstrated a 31% decline in the number of puffs earned on a progressive ratio. Okay, so there's that 30%, and I found that in a couple other things, 20 to 30%. Subjective ratings of smoking were largely negative throughout the study in the denicotized group, while the nicotine-containing condition reported increasingly positive subjective effects with repeated exposure. Acute craving suppression following smoking remained evident throughout the study, regardless of nicotine content. And here's where I got thrown off by that, because I read the findings, and I'm like, what were they trying to see if they could quit using, and it wasn't it. It says, these effects, under conclusion, these effects highlight the importance of non-nicotine sensory motor stimuli as determinants of the maintenance of smoking behavior, and suggest that extinction of conditioned reinforcement in the absence of nicotine progresses slowly. Oh, that hurt my brain, and I had to read that like 10 times to understand what it meant. But it basically says this is what it highlights, how important the non-nicotine aspects of smoking are to people. And that's why you will get people who haven't smoked in a long time and aren't addicted to nicotine anymore go back to smoking, and it's that feeling, it's that inhale, it's that throat hit that vapors are always looking for, it's that cloud they want to see. It is different for everybody.
Yes.
And
the olfactory, the hand to mouth, something to do with your hands,
and this is why it was important, because it said it suggests that extinction of conditioned reinforcement in the absence of nicotine progresses slowly. So people will keep using these cigarettes regardless of the nicotine. And that's a huge thing. That's essentially what they found here, is that people are going to keep smoking them whether there's nicotine in it or not. They just get used to it. And so that makes you question, okay, smokers smoke for the nicotine, but they die from the smoke. Well, how true is that really? If this study is showing people just keep smoking them, and that's a lot more important than people think. And nobody, from what I could see, went out long enough to see if people would eventually actually completely quit. And another study essentially said, they may just, one of the other studies, what I think was one of the earlier ones from 2015, said they may just, get their nicotine from vaping and keep smoking. They may put some snus in their mouth and keep smoking. That's how important a lot of that smoking behavior. And again, that also, you see that every day when you see people not able to chew gum or stick a lozenge in their mouth or put a patch on, they're still craving that something else. And when they get vaping, that's what I was missing, that behavior thing. Mm-hmm. And the more they decimate the vaping industry and scare people away from vaping, all this stuff, these low nicotine things. There's your argument. It's not that people won't cut back on smoking. They don't. They do. It's not that people will compensate and smoke more. They won't. Studies don't show that. But this research is showing that they're not quitting completely, and that nicotine plays a much smaller part, or not even that much smaller, but much smaller, because they think it's everything, and it's not everything. So now it's much smaller than that in people continuing to keep smoking. So there's your argument against these. I'll stop sharing. Against these products is that people are just going to keep smoking them. They're going to use other nicotine because unless you can get them to go to something different that fills that void. That's not just nicotine. And again, I go back to my husband all the time. Even vaping didn't fill that void for him. There was something else in the actual tobacco, and it was when he combined snus with vaping that he was finally able to finish, to just get away from him. So that is my take on all of this, on the whole VLN thing, is that we need to be very careful in crafting our arguments against it, or in some cases we might be able to support it. It could possibly be an argument for getting these governments to back off on vaping. It could be a different narrative that we could use. And that is my segue into the deep dive. Did you guys have anything else to say? Did I miss anything in chat that anybody wanted to say?
Did everybody get all that? Did you guys get all that?
I tried to put it in layman's terms, but I'm telling you, that one sentence I read, that's the one I read out loud to my husband. I'm like, what am I reading here? Am I really reading this? What am I reading? And
I think for a lot of people it makes sense. I mean, how many testimonies on CASAA's site do we have of people who tried lozenges, who tried patches, who tried gums, who tried sprays, who tried all of these, NRTs and other products that said it didn't work for me. Even though there's all the nicotine that any person who smokes could need in those products.
You put 2 pieces of gum, 2 lozenges, have it every 10 minutes.
Mix it up, mix and match, throw on a patch, have a piece of gum, live a little. But how many people were not successful in quitting until they had something that met those other sensory needs? And that was me. I think for a lot of people here, that was, the same story. It's the hand to mouth. It's the olfactory. It's the visual stimuli of feeling and seeing something that you inhale and exhale. And that, good Lord, my social media name is Logan Exhales. It's very important to me that I get to see that experience, that I feel it, that I see it, that I'm enjoying it. That's the biggest thing. And again, to piggyback off of Neff's point about vaping kind of inherently having a VLN option.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people out there who, quit smoking, worked their way all the way down to 0 milligram and still vape because of the enjoyment, for all of those sensory things that fill that void, that need that people have in order to remain smoke-free. Those options are available in vapor products. So,
and Janine says, I wonder how many people who use VLN cigs will quit by accident. And, there's a good chance. And that's what the study that I came, when I was looking at all this stuff, it just blew my mind. Because my knee-jerk reaction when I saw VLN cigarettes, well, they're just going to smoke more. They're going to do like they did with light filters and stuff, covering the holes and stuff to get that nicotine. And they're not lying. People do smoke less. But again, if you went to your doctor and said, hey, I cut my cigarette intake by 20 to 30%, and I'm going to do, then that's it. I'm done. That I'm going to do, 60 to 80%, or no, sorry, 70 to 80% smoking from now on for the rest of my life. I'm good, right? I cut my wrist, right? He'd be like, no, but, and that's the problem, is that it doesn't look like people are going to actually quit because there's no nicotine. And that's what this one shows, that, they're going to reduce it. Yeah, try bird watching. Homicidal Maniac said I wasn't truly satisfied until I tried bird watching.
Yeah, me too. I'm right with you, Homicidal Maniac. I'm right with you.
So there's a good argument for, hey, look, you guys, since 1998, your argument for this thing, for doing this with cigarettes, which I have to put out there right now, I do not agree with, because I don't think it's fair for that 30% of people who smoke who don't want to quit, and they shouldn't be forced to quit. And that's their right to keep smoking, to take away their enjoyment of it. And so I'm strongly against that. That's the libertarian in me. I'm sorry, but I don't agree with it. However, if their government's going to try to go forward with this, A, they need to really understand that very low nicotine cigarettes aren't probably going to keep people from quitting. B, that means kids who start using it are still going to think it looks cool, and they're not going to care whether there's nicotine in it or not. And they may still get that hand-to-mouth habit thing going regardless of the nicotine, because that's what their own studies are proving, that people aren't actually quitting it. So they need to take that into account. And they also need to turn around and say, okay, well, if this is our goal, if this has been our goal from the first time, to get these people who won't quit, which all our data says probably won't quit, to not go to other harmful combustible products, because some people might use little cigars. Some people might go to cigars. They might go to pipe smoke. They might do anything else like that, which cigars and pipe smoke have lower risk for lung cancer, not necessarily for oral cancer. They need to not decimate vaping. They need to make sure that there's an affordable, appealing, effective to quit with the nicotine caps and the flavor bans and the taxes, so that these people actually do that. And so there's a better argument than, people are just going to compensate. They're just going to overcompensate and smoke more. That's not an argument. I'm here to tell you right now, that's not true. And they do actually smoke less, but it's a ridiculous argument to say, well, they're smoking less, so it does reduce harm. Well, you didn't agree with that whenever anybody would come up to you and tell you, I quit smoking. I only smoke 10 cigarettes a day instead of 20. I'm reducing my harm, right? Go to any literature, go to any website, tobacco control website on anywhere, and they'll say, oh no, just cutting back your cigarettes isn't going to reduce your risk. So they can't have it both ways. But anyhow, let's segue into our deep dive. We can talk about some more.
Okay, ready? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Damn. That was almost a deep dive in itself.
I'm sorry. I tried to go through it fast. I really did.
No, that was wonderful.
It could be a deep dive.
Because again, I was one of those people originally in that same camp of like, they're just going to smoke more. Nah, science says otherwise. All right, you guys, let's dive deep. While we are on the topic of poor arguments,
I have to talk about this one.
Poor arguments. That's what we're going to talk about today. A lot of arguments on our side, a lot of things that we try to reinforce our positions with may not be the most effective ways to go about it. So we are asking the question, how do we sharpen our messaging? How do we sharpen our messaging, Alex?
Really quick, though, before you get in that, I just want to talk about Neff's comment here saying, I'm glad to hear VLN is working. That's THR. That's good news.
Yeah.
You got the wrong message there, bud, because not working. It's not. I mean, it's not working. It's not working for the reasons that vapors often throw out there, but it's not working.
I think to piggyback off of your point earlier, if we were providing people with that alternative, that place to land, there is a place where VLN cigarettes fit into that whole equation of THR. If they're even if they're just a middle point, right? If they're just a transitory thing, that's still kind of a tool in the toolbox,
right?
So I think I'm in Kristin's camp on this, and that there is no harm reduction here. This is really I'm in line with the earlier comment about giving consumers the option to select their own nicotine content, to take their own action, make their own decisions, and say, I want to feel less dependent on this product, and I know I can do that by switching to a lower nicotine cigarette, or I can start that attempt. But I don't view this as harm reduction. I don't actually. CASAA does not agree with the MRTP authorization here for a couple of reasons. First, what we are talking about now, which is that VLN cigarettes are still combustible cigarettes, and you get all of the harm and none of the drug that you want, or not enough of it. And of course, all of the science that's coming out that Kristin has highlighted in as compact and dense a form as possible. So nobody should feel bad about not getting all that stuff absorbed. The other
Yeah,
thing,
don't feel bad.
the other side of the marketing statements that that 22nd Century is being allowed to make, this idea that these cigarettes will help you reduce your nicotine consumption, to me and to this organization, that rings as a therapeutic claim. No one else is being allowed to make any statements along those lines. Although it is arguably true with vapor products, snus, any other reduced harm product. And so I think that this authorization is wrong. I have no problem with companies marketing lower nicotine content cigarettes, but to make a modified risk claim on top of this,
Sure,
I think I don't believe. I'll have to emphasize that word. I don't believe that jives with the data. So anyway, we're not talking about very low nicotine cigarettes anymore. I am going to start this off with two things that are not necessarily on topic. First, you may have seen me attempting to share my screen here.
I'm sorry.
This is, I haven't even listened to this. I don't even know if the audio is going to come through here, but I think this is hilarious. All I've done is watch the image. So anyway, just a little bit of levity there. This comes from Twitter from Juka Kilavoria. Sorry if I butchered your name, Juka. But since we are moving on to something that came from Twitter from one of our board members, I figured this would be good. Also, just a pet peeve, completely unrelated to vaping or tobacco or anything like that. One of those examples about how the message or the meaning of a particular word has been lost is the word decimated. The actual definition of the word decimated means to reduce by 1/10 or 10%. It does not mean complete and total devastation. And I blame weather people around the country for misusing this word to describe natural disasters. Decimated doesn't mean that. Stop.
Devastated is a better word, probably.
Anytime anybody says that the coast is being decimated by this storm, think to yourself, that's not bad. It's only 10%.
Devastated is probably the word you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Not decimated.
Now they got me using decimated. Sorry.
No worries. Everybody gets it wrong. Even the dictionary is.
I will not anymore.
Mean what it used to mean anymore. So
I'll tell you that from now on. I will not get that wrong ever again.
But that is a little bit more in line with what we're talking here, which is all about sharpening the message. And this topic, I know some people have probably been, watching the vaping medias over the past couple weeks or week. It's a couple weeks now. Matt Cully, one of our board members, took to Twitter and shared his views about arguments that don't work anymore or probably never worked to begin with, and broke this down into three things. Certainly there are more out there, but the whataboutisms, the MSA and MSA blood money, and the business and economic argument. And so we figured we'd take this on ourselves and maybe expand on this and hopefully focus a lot more on sort of antidotes to these sort of failing arguments.
Because we've seen a lot of people saying, okay, now you're telling us what we can't say. What should we say? So we're hopefully come from that aspect.
So I also want to kind of set the table here. And I know that some people's immediate reaction to criticism about these specific arguments would be, well, we've been trying to present the science and the data and our personal testimonies and all of the things for a decade now, more than a decade, and it's just not working. So one of the justifications for using arguments like these is that they do hopefully grab people's attention. Sometimes we believe that being combative or aggressive forces people to listen to us more. I know that, certainly when I was younger, and there are people out there who we all love to get the slam dunk. I think it makes us feel powerful and righteous when we can sort of call somebody out and make them feel stupid for their dumb opinion. But that isn't how we actually bring people into the coalition. We need to come at this with an attitude of inclusion and empowerment. And so before we get too far into arguments that don't work, I want to set the tone of persistence beats resistance. The more that we stick to the facts and the truth and the sometimes hard truths, we feel like broken records, but that's kind of how we get through this, is by constantly sticking to the facts, the science, as Kristin has laid out for us here, and our arguments don't change because they are correct, and that's sort of the basis for a lot of this. So I know that I don't quite know how to do this whole. This is a panel discussion, and I wrote a lot of notes down, and I don't want to be the only person talking.
Why don't you start off by reading Matt's first tweet, especially for our listeners who are going to be just listening, just so they know what we're talking about. And I did just share the tweet, the thread link in the chat, and I will put it in the description after the show.
Excellent. So we can everybody can play along at home. Let's go with Matt's first point here, which is whataboutisms. We do this a lot, says Matt. But what about flavored alcohol? Yes, there's plenty of hypocrisy in this world, but most don't care. Alcohol is part of the culture, and its risks are accepted by society. Vaping is still new. Society fights new perceived risks. I don't know if I want to read all of these in line here.
No, I just meant the first one.
As we go along, I think, at least in my notes, I've suggested some antidotes to this, or alternatives, or really just focusing on some of the nuances of what we're really trying to say there. And my answer here, and we can discuss this, is sort of turning what about on its ear. I think there's value in making the comparison based on policy. We aren't banning flavored booze because we've acknowledged that such restrictions would lead to confusion, a robust underground market, and a different public health crisis. We've already seen this, right? It's documented. Prohibition of drugs and alcohol was and is a failed policy. And I think we can make that point by focusing on the policy and the documented public health consequences of alcohol prohibition and drugs prohibition. And so I will tell this story all the time. I was at a committee hearing in New Jersey. It was I believe it was a flavor ban. And I started off part of my testimony by saying, we're not talking about flavored alcohol products here. And as soon as flavored alcohol came out of my mouth, there was an eye roll with full head and neck involvement from one of the committee members. Just absolutely sick of this argument. And I immediately had to kind of struggle to make sure that I was speaking clearly about what I just said, which is this is a failure of policy. I'm not comparing alcohol products to vapor products. I'm saying that the policy is a failure, and it failed for this. It's going to fail for this other thing. It's not any different. And so it's less of a whataboutism and more about questioning the efficacy of the policy itself. And I don't know if that is correct. I don't know if that lands with people, but happy to discuss that as one of a potential alternative statements in line with this. Any thoughts?
No.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
We'll move along here.
I do. One of the things about the alcohol argument, just from perusing Twitter over the years, that I just find, I don't know, even more baseless or useless of an argument is when we direct that argument at FDA, which which is just even more useless, really. I don't have a better word here for it, because FDA doesn't regulate alcohol.
Yeah.
In case people didn't know, the Department of Treasury's Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, the TTB. I know that's quite a mouthful of a title there, but the TTB are the people that actually regulate the labeling, the selling, all of it. The wholesale distribution, labeling, importation, production, and advertising. There you go. There's the whole spiel that the TP. So when people bring up, they at FDA on Twitter or something, they say, well, look at the, Lucky Charms looking labels on these craft beers or whatever. What about that? You're kind of throwing yourself under the bus here. You're throwing a different industry under the bus, being regulated by an entirely different agency. It really doesn't make for an effective argument in any capacity. And this is something I screamed about at the top of my lungs on Twitter for a really long time. And then my face turned blue and I just gave up. It's just, it doesn't.
Anybody's arguing that they should also ban flavored alcohol.
I mean, yeah, you're kind of
arguing that,
shooting yourself in the foot here. Like, you're almost justifying the opposite of your own point here. So I don't know.
And in line,
I just wanted to throw in there for anybody who's curious as to why you shouldn't at the FDA about flavored alcohol and labeling. It's not even their department.
In line with that, with the sort of the alcohol arguments, the what about alcohol stuff, it's not so much relevant anymore because Tobacco 21 is federal law. But when we start comparing these products to alcohol and even cannabis, I think people may need to gear themselves up for vapor products being sold, and all of these alternative products being sold exclusively in adult-only establishments.
Sure.
It depends on your state. I know, I can go, if I wanted to, buy beer in the grocery store here in New York, have to go to a liquor store. But, the alcohol laws depend on your state. But for the most part, it's safe to say that, a liquor store is, it's 21 and up. Unless accompanied by a parent or guardian. And so if those are the regulations that people are willing to accept for your vape shop, and I know a lot of people are, and that may be where we're headed. CASAA does not support the idea that lower risk products should be exclusively allowed in adult only establishments, while combustible cigarettes are available in every convenience store in the United States of America, around the world, et cetera, ad nauseum. But that may be where we're heading. So if you accept that, then by all means continue comparing these products to alcohol.
And hopefully that would just be a stepping stone, because I think if they started seeing the results of having these products available, that eventually somebody might go, why are we hiding these in these buildings over here? But people will start to figure it out. And you have to say that it's one of the things that CASAA has been about probably since our early days, is just surviving long enough to get enough people doing this and seeing it and trying it and over to our side and we've reached that point. I mean, we're at a point now. It's like Helen said last week, it's not going anywhere. It really isn't. There's going to be some version of vaping. It's out there. There's going to be some version of it. And I think a good thing to do is, okay, so we don't want to use whataboutism. So what would be an alternative to that? And you gave a good alternative, which is a regulatory
comparing the policy outcomes.
More of a comparison rather than a what about. And some people, I used to be called the analogy queen. Because I've always come up with them. I'm the one who came up with the condom one, and those are analogies, which is different from a whataboutism, in my opinion. I know Danielle and I disagreed on this, but, one is saying you wouldn't do this, so why are you doing this? That's a whataboutism. But analogy is, it's a subtle difference. It really is. You wouldn't ban condoms to keep people from having unsafe sex. That's not a whataboutism. That isn't well, what about condoms? You haven't banned those. That's a whataboutism. Do you know what I mean? It's more of a get people to think that this doesn't really make much sense.
I see where the confusion is, and perhaps I'm not, consulting my Merriam-Webster dictionary enough, but I think that's another sort of illustration of we're talking about risk. We're talking about policy, and it makes sense that it doesn't make sense that you would ban condoms to promote safer sex,
Right.
or promote abstinence. It's just, especially when it comes to sex, it's a biological drive. We are purpose built to make more humans, and there's only one real way to do that, unless you're like super sci-fi China and you're cloning people. But so it's I agree. I think this is more about comparing. It's a risk comparison kind of policy. It's an analogy.
Cloning people just doesn't sound like fun, though.
Are you kidding?
Have
you
just
ever
doesn't
seen
seem like fun.
Is it
Well,
multiplicity?
and then there's the other argument, because you always see they say adults don't like flavors.
But I guess,
and that would be a good way. That'd be an illustration. It's not a whataboutism. So, well, what about this? You allow that. That's a whatabout. You say, well, adults don't like flavors. Really? Well, what about these flavors and those flavors? I mean, that's a little different because, again, it's sort of read the room, know your audience.
Have you been to a liquor store or a bakery in your life? Have you ever seen a Baskin Robbins? They got 31 flavors.
Yeah.
Guess who drives the kids to the ice cream shop?
I look at keto. I'm on keto, and I look at not this week because my husband brought home friggin' donuts that he bought for work. The adults at work, because adults don't like.
Donuts.
They're all liver flavored donuts. But if you look at like the keto flavors, they're all like, oh, look, this tastes just like Snickers. This tastes just like Oreos. That kids aren't going on a diet to lose. These aren't pointed. These aren't targeting kids. So what about's kind of good for that? It's like, well, adults don't like flavors. Well, what about keto flavored stuff? Or what about, that's a whole different kind of what about, as opposed to saying, well, why aren't you banning this? What about this? Why are you letting that go? That's a whole different thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the starting an argument with what about is very argument specific. So on one hand, it's useful, but on the other hand, it sort of misses the point, and we all just sort of sound stupid. So
I think it depends on the conversation, and it depends on the audience. I think that's where whataboutisms can play a role. If you're just talking to somebody casually that you've met on the street and they're raising points about, your e-liquid label is brightly colored and has, fun font on it, and it comes in blue raz or whatever, making those, but they're also a fan of candy and craft beer. You can make those kind of whataboutism, arguments with not necessarily arguments, but points to someone to kind of shift that perception. And I think those can be useful tools then, but when you're addressing policymakers, when you're talking to agencies and things like this, whataboutisms they tend to fall flat, really.
Yeah. Well, because people just throw it out. They're not actually, if somebody says, well, adults don't like candy flavored things, then you could say, well, what about this? You can't say that. You're basically countering their claim. But if you're just listening and you're just saying, well, what about flavored alcohol? Why, you don't ban that? That's all. We're not talking about flavored alcohol. We're talking about nicotine. Then that's a whole different thing, because you're talking about the alcohol and the flavors as opposed to a very specific argument that adults don't like flavored things. Why would an adult like something that's flavored cotton candy? And then you kind of point out to, well, who's buying this cotton candy alcohol, vodka? That's a whole different thing. It's a very specific argument, I would say.
Also, with regard to adults eating sugary things, as we get old, we kind of got to watch that sugar intake. Our teeth aren't so great anymore. Some of us are pushing diabetes. Some of us have diabetes. It's a diet consideration. It's not a flavor consideration. I love sweet things. You should see what I eat for breakfast every day. It looks like a damn birthday cake.
If anyone's curious what I had for breakfast today, it's on Twitter.
It tastes amazing. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. The other 2 points that Matt made was MSA and. I was just going to say we can go past that just so people know what it was. That was the argument that the MSA is like a conspiracy thing, and then the final one was arguing that your business, you're losing business or stuff like that. So
I'll pick this up at MSA, and we can do a little bit of discussion like we did on the last point.
I didn't know if you wanted to break that down. I thought we were going to go
Yeah,
on to
I'm
talk about
gonna move through each of these, and
Oh,
I
okay,
think
sorry.
that's sort of the overall point here is that we're not just saying stop doing things. The point of this conversation and our organization is all about promoting alternatives. So, getting back to Matt's thread, MSA, it's complex. Most don't explain it well and/or get many details wrong, which renders the argument useless. Unless you're a pro on regulation and tax policy, it's best to steer clear. I have my own take on how it's not just the master settlement agreement payments, but all of a state's tobacco revenues should be highlighted. And I don't know that this is my take on this, or my alternative suggestion here is not so much proposing an alternative argument, but more proposing kind of a protocol when discussing tobacco regulation or taxation or laws, which is that much like what we see at conferences, academic, professional, whatever, or in publishing research, the principal investigators, the authors, whoever, speakers at a conference it is customary and I guess in many cases required that they disclose their funding sources. So I would rather see at the presentation of every piece of legislation or regulation at the state level, at the very least, states, bill sponsors must include a disclosure about how much money the state takes in tobacco revenue. If you and I have to disclose any kind of income from a tobacco or vapor company as a conflict of interest, then certainly states should be doing the same thing.
Or a pharmaceutical company, not just tobacco, because they have a vested interest in what happens with vaping too, right?
Sure. Any corporate donor that is funding your research organization or whatever, if we're being required to disclose that, then states should be required to disclose that revenue as well. And the public should at least be given the opportunity to consider how that revenue might bias pending legislation and policy. That in and of itself, I believe, would be a separate piece of legislation, completely separate from tobacco or any substance or drug, pharmaceutical, whatever. So that's pretty much that. The MSA stuff, it is complicated because there are nuanced arguments here. And I think one of the most significant thing about the MSA specifically is the fact that states do not spend nearly the CDC recommended amount of money on tobacco control.
Right.
That's a great point to raise when we're making the argument that the state already has the money and they shouldn't be coming after these new, safer products. But ultimately, if we run the risk, I think, of saying that, well, the existing tobacco control measures are good, they just need to be fully funded, and that's we don't actually agree with that. There are a lot of pitfalls and bad outcomes that can be attributed to existing tobacco control measures. First and foremost, the unrelenting crusade against safer alternatives. But I have used a similar argument in the past, which is essentially challenging the state that if you believe the existing tobacco control measures are effective, then fully fund them. Fully fund them with the money you already make off of cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that seems like a more, it's not impactful. It's not, I'm not looking for, Friday Night Raw or whatever the hell. It's just, it's a pretty deadpan logical argument that says, if you believe in it, put your money where your mouth is.
Well, then you see people who make the MSA argument in areas where, local cities and some states don't, they do use it or they don't have it, or you can't use that everywhere and I'm not even really sure what is the argument. Oh, it's all just a big conspiracy. I mean, what are people saying?
I think, you know, the whole MSA blood money argument is that states are, you know, crushing vapor in favor of continuing to collect as outsized tax revenue from cigarettes and master settlement disbursements, which is based on the disbursements are what they are, but it's based on sales. It's you know, depending on the company, it's based on their market share and so on.
Right.
So it you know, if cigarette sales are declining, then there's a reduction in tax revenue for sure. But I don't exactly know how that affects MSA disbursements. That's separate.
Yeah, it's not going to help. I mean, saying first of all, the whole when you say blood money, it makes you sound like a nut job. You know, I mean, could it be true? Maybe, but I mean, most of these lawmakers aren't seeing that money in any particular meaningful way. I mean, a lot of times it's just going into general funds.
It does come up in it annually when states do their budget. There is usually a line in there for how those MSA disbursements are going to be dispersed.
Right.
So there is an annual reminder, of course, that this settlement is pumping money into the states. But yeah, like you said,
when they show up, I mean, half the time they're all empty, you know, absentee voting. They don't bother being there. You know, I mean, it's if you've ever seen some of these votes, it's like half the people aren't even there. So, you know, it comes off, you know, Green Eyed Lady said it comes off kind of like a conspiracy theory. And even though it is true, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean somebody's not out to get you. Yeah, it does. And they like, you know, I was watching Grim Green and Danielle's talking about this, and he just said people don't understand it unless you're an expert. And I think actually Matt said this too on Reg Watch. It's like, unless you're an expert and you can really explain it and you've got the time to explain it, and if you're just on Twitter and clapping back at somebody, they're not going to understand that. You're just going to sound like a nut. You know, you're better off taking an argument. I think you just touched on this of why they've passed all these other laws like Tobacco 21. Why aren't they just enforcing that? Why are they not giving that a chance before they start taking all these other things? Because they don't even know if that worked already. You know, it's like if you're going to fix your car and, you know, you turn the screw and then you just start ripping out parts of the engine before seeing if just the turn of the screw could have worked. You know, see, analogies. I do analogies. I'm sorry. It's who I am. You know, but you know what I'm saying? And so that might be a better argument that they haven't even given a chance to the laws they're passing, and they're going crazy on this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, as far as, and I would say MSA taxes, and that was a good point you made too about if you're looking for tax money, this is not a good, you know, oh, we need money for this. We need money for this. You know, we're going to tax it to make sure that we're addressing these issues. And it's like, can we really trust you to do this because you get this money every year from the MSA money, and they can't deny that. So, and you're not spending it on what you're supposed to be spending on it. And you can go look at who does that, the ranking every year of Truth. Is that Truth or is that Campaign for
Campaign, I think.
You can go look on any website, pull up your state and say, this is how much of the money, you know, this is your side. This is tobacco control saying you're not even spending the money that you're getting on the stuff you're supposed to get. And we're supposed to trust you that if we give you more money, tax money now on these vapor products, you're going to use it for the right thing. You know, that might be a better argument because you're not getting into all the details. You're not saying things like blood money and stuff. And it's very demonstrable because you've got this sheet from Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. You know,
I'll push back on that just a little bit because someone else already brought it up about the Green-Eyed Lady mentioned the MSA argument simply comes off as conspiracy theory. Neff followed up with comes off as accusatory. That's a good way to get people to tune out your message.
True.
Coming after them and saying that we don't trust you to spend this money properly usually just shuts the conversation down.
You could soften that. You could soften that by saying your predecessors.
Sure.
Your predecessors had access to this money, and that way it's not on them, and they can show up their predecessors. So you know that could be.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with my guns here, and which is that if you believe in the tobacco control measures that are in place, then fully fund them, and that I think that's the challenge for states. is to put their money where their mouth is and not go looking for additional sources of revenue.
So make
and
sure
I promise we will get through this entire list. I absolutely promise you we're going to do this.
But if they if you say then fully fund it and they go, okay, well, we're going to tax vapor products then to fully fund it.
The argument is you don't need any more money. You have it already. So use the money you already have to fund the programs that you think are going to be successful.
And you don't even have to mention the word MSA.
Yeah.
And then you already, and then piggyback that with, and you already have the laws that you haven't even given a chance with. Let's see how this works first before you just start passing more laws. So those two things, I guess, cover that. Okay, let's go on to the next one.
So the last one from Matt, and we have some to add here, so we're not done yet. The last one is nuanced, says Matt, but hopefully you'll get my point. While we shouldn't stop explaining how many businesses have been ruined, most people won't care if they think you're selling poison. So you have to get people to understand tobacco harm reduction before complaining about lost revenue. I absolutely take Matt's point here. I think he's right that it's on. Unfortunately, it's on all of us to try to explain how tobacco harm reduction works and make these comparisons to other harm reduction strategies and so on. And typically, or historically, I have always looked at the businesses being ruined by these policies as an argument best left to the industry. And so I'm not exactly sure. I didn't actually talk to Matt prior to doing this, and we did invite him to come on, but he's unavailable today. So I'm not exactly sure if this was specifically directed at industry, but much like what we were encouraging people to do with regard to the Washington tax bill, this is really about knowing. You got to read the room, right? You got to see what committee you're in. If it's a health committee, they don't want to hear about your business. They don't care. Like Matt said, they think you're selling poison. But if you're in a finance committee, industry stakeholders are in the best position to bring their numbers and say, here's how many shops I have open. Here's how many employees. Here's the tax revenue. Here are all of the previously vacant storefronts that we've turned into, a bright, shiny place for people to come and experience these products and get the help they need, and so on. That is impactful. That actually is meaningful and needs to be, that has to continue, especially, lawmakers sitting in a finance committee have to consider the numbers. And there are economic and public health consequences for shutting businesses down, and so that is still important. But coming from me talking about the economic impact of shutting down vape shops, it doesn't resonate in the same way. And frankly, as a consumer organization, we don't really take up those arguments. Certainly, if someone in a particular state feels that mentioning that outcome in a letter to a lawmaker, we will include it. But the bulk of our argument really is on the harm reduction side of things, and hopefully, again, I know the harm reduction arguments are based in science and data, which everybody's eyes glaze over when they have to listen to it. But it's the facts. It's the truth. We have the truth in the literature. And we are just going to have to keep saying it over and over again until it lands. And I think I don't want to put words in Matt's mouth, but if that seems to me the direction, that is the antidote.
That's essentially what he said on Reg Watch, I think it was, is that if you're in front of a bunch of a town board or something that is spouting out about saving kids, that's not, that message of you're closing my business is not going to resonate with them. It's just not.
And it does take that initial discussion, I guess, of harm reduction, but a point to be made for consumers when talking about shops closing is access to these products. That's a good position that you can take on it if you're you don't have access via online sales, you can't get things at home, when these shops are, when their doors are being threatened, with being closed, your access to safer alternatives goes away while your access to deadly combustibles remains widely available.
Right.
And I think that's a point that consumers can make in those meetings, those hearings, when you're talking about shops. But yeah, I agree. Like if I walk in and I start talking about, my local shop's revenue loss or tax loss, it doesn't ring from me like it would from, the owners or industry.
And I want to add, and we'll touch back on the whataboutisms. I think what you said is correct, Logan. But a little bit of word of caution here is that I think some people may have a tendency to stray into, well, you're not doing it to cigarettes, and that's the whataboutism we talked about with alcohol.
Sure. Yeah, you can't.
We're not advocating. We're not advocating for a ban on cigarettes. No. We've taken the position that prohibition doesn't work. So it's mainly highlighting that discrepancy in the policy in treating the safer products more harshly than the more dangerous products. It's not it's not advocating for shutting down or banning sales of cigarettes in convenience stores. It's just.
Imagine if the only place you could buy electric cars was California and they were banned everywhere else, but you could buy gas guzzlers everywhere.
Sure.
It makes no sense. It just makes no sense. And this is an argument that I've made on many a show, that this is why it's so important for consumers to show up, and why it's so important for these shops to rally their customers. I see all the time, I've got all these great customers, I've saved their life. You got to get them to pay it forward and show up at these meetings. They've got to show the human toll, and that will fly a lot further, because all they're hearing on the other side is save the kids, and somebody's got to say save the adults, as far as their lives, not their livelihood. And it's not that we're downplaying how important it is, because we know it is, and we know that so many of our members own vape shops or did own vape shops, and they were their customers too, and we know that. But as soon as you walk into that meeting or jump on some thread or something and start complaining about revenue loss and even job losses, which is sad, like the point was made, Danielle said it, if you're peddling poison, they're not going to care about your job. If you're standing on the corner selling drugs that are killing people, which is another false, narrative from that side, from the drug side, that they're fighting all the time, that image. But just imagine if that's how they're seeing us, or seeing vape shop owners, that you're just peddling poison and you're killing people and EVALI and all that kind of stuff. They're just not going to be like, so what? You should be shut down. And people who are reading the threads are thinking the same thing. So you have to show the human toll of, I can't get, and I've been sharing that stuff on our threads and stuff lately, is people who are having trouble getting product as consumers because of all these regulations and laws and bans. They can't get anything these days. And that's the human side. That's what people relate to, and getting your family members, getting your kids to come and talk about. It's so great that.
So I think we'll touch back on that a little bit down the line here when we start talking about arguments for particular political persuasions. You raise a really good. I don't know if you exactly said it, but I think you did in a way, and it's triggered me to think about this. And so we'll come back to this when we get down here, because there is an antidote to this for business owners.
Ian, that's a whataboutism.
So
that's a whereaboutism.
But still thing is, where's all the outrage over kids smoking? And I do see this one a lot. And
there is outrage, and that's why we have the Tobacco Control Act.
Yeah, there is outrage, and they're just lumping us in with that. That's the problem. It's the kids smoking outrage that they're lumping us in with. Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Sorry. We're on 2 hours, and I'm going to get through this because I got to go fix and eat dinner.
Okay, hurry up.
So.
Quit dilly-dallying then.
In keeping with the theme of keeping this short, I'd like to add a couple things to this list. One of the things that we've all heard, and being on a panel here with two parents, one of the, I think, most egregious things that people in our camp say is, well, parents should just be parents. Parents are responsible for their child, and they should be doing this, and they're not doing a very good job. And you can go down all the arguments about how kids are basically just using schools as daycares or whatever, without any acknowledgement of the fact that everybody is busy and people are working multiple jobs just to stay alive, and that a parent's life, even before they had kids, was probably pretty stressful. So heaping all of this on parents as if they are solely responsible for this, I think is a bit of a weird tack.
Crazy.
And so the suggested antidote here, rather than throwing parents under the bus, who are very powerful allies in all of this, and should be powerful allies, because we have parents who smoke. And as we have highlighted many times before, and it bears repeating, the likelihood of a young person to go on to smoke is largely determined by whether or not their parents smoke.
Yes. Not misbehaving.
As an antidote to this, rather than throwing parents under the bus, it's important to highlight that parents aren't actually being given the resources they need. The criticism directed at both the quality of information presented to parents, which is largely biased towards abstinence-only strategies, and promoting a moral approach to discouraging substance use. I guess there's supposed to be an "and" in there, and I didn't write that. So anyway, all of that to say, parents aren't being equipped to deal with this, and they're being given bad information, bad advice, and this is, the result of living in a punishment-based kind of treatment format that we're all unfortunately accustomed to. And also, once again, I am recommending the Safety First Real Drug Education for Teens from the Drug Policy Alliance, which does address vaping along with other substance use. And of course, that is all about, first of all, parents and educators being able to have a conversation with young people and equip them to deal with any adverse consequences from substance use, which includes nicotine. And I don't know how many of us actually spent time in high school, but there was a point in time where caffeine was a real big deal. And even that is something that people need to discuss openly and honestly as a substance use issue.
You see kids drinking Coke and Mountain Dew all the time. It's crazy.
For the parents in the room, I'll toss it to you. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. This is an argument that I have not stomached well over the years. Blame the parents. Parents need to parent their children. This is just a gross argument. Parents are not well equipped out there in the world to handle this. I mean, we've seen this through drugs, through sex education, all of these things where the information given to parents is poor, stifled. The education in our institutions is poor and stifled. We're not equipping our kids for the future, for the things that they're going to be presented with, choices that they're going to be presented with, and it's almost always more harmful than having those open, honest conversations, and evidence-based conversations with our youth, because when you're not equipped to handle situations, when you're told things, that cannabis is going to make you jump off of roofs and do all of these wild, crazy things, and then those things don't happen. If you decide to take that risk, you go, well, this thing may make me jump off a roof. That's what I've been told. And then you do it and you have a great time. You question everything else as well. And it really just doesn't lead to any productive, good outcomes. And so, I don't believe in blaming the parents. I blame the policies. I refuse to blame parents for this, for any teen or youth substance use, whether it's vaping or drugs, whatever it may be. I'm 100% behind blaming poor policy, poor education, misinformation, not informing and equipping our youth, than blaming mom and dad who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week to put food on the table and pay the bills. And their only reliable reliable source of information is the vaping epidemic on the nightly news, you know? So yeah, I can't get behind blaming parents for any of this. Like Eddie Teen said, reefer madness. I mean, we're very much in nicotine madness right now. And I can't blame parents for trying to do their best to protect their children. You know, even if they are misinforming their kids, it's not them who's misinforming their kids. They're just playing middleman for the information that they're being given by the institutions that we're supposed to trust. So yeah, policy, not parents. That's my entire take on this. I refuse to blame parents for any of this, whether it's sex or drugs or vaping or rock and roll, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and you touched on something that I was going to say is that maybe parents wouldn't be freaking out about their kids vaping if they had the right information about it. You know, they think their kids are getting brainworms and are going to be addicted for life. And oh, there's another. I get that. They're going to be addicted, for life, and they're just getting so much. So then that's making them panic and freak out, which is then pushing these policies and groups like PAVE and stuff like that. And if they had the right information, if they knew things like that, most kids who start smoking do so because there's a family circle, there's a family line going on there. They're much more likely to start smoking if their parents smoked. And so their panic, their overreaction on their kids trying some vapor products, if they don't smoke, if there's not a history of smoking or vaping in their family, the chances of that kid going on to becoming a lifelong vapor are almost nil. And they don't know that, so they're freaking out about it. So people who are blaming parents have to keep that in mind, that that's driving this too. But as a parent who is completely equipped to address this with her kids, and all my kids at one point started smoking. I was a work from home mom. I'm here. I was here for my daughter who she's, she had vapor products in the house and stuff, and she still ended up smoking in the house, which was clearly a call for help. In the shower, in the bathroom. I don't know what she was thinking. But I'm just saying that we're there. We're open. We talk, things about sex, drugs, all that kind of stuff. Always have been open with them, talked about the issues with it, really pushed upon them to not smoke, and, very communicative, very much got her into therapy and did everything that we possibly could for her. And yet she still did this to me. And yes, she got the vapor product. She got the cigarettes from friends. And so let's do this from a cigarette point of view, because the vapor product she eventually got from me to keep her not smoking. But this idea when she got these cigarettes, did I blame her friend, for giving them the cigarettes because they were like 14 or 15? No, somebody sold them cigarettes. Okay, so most of the chance they probably stole it, and that's something to keep in mind too. But first of all, I can't watch my kid 24/7. Now, we did eventually catch them, but did I? I can't say that there's no adult culpability there. That's not me, because when these kids are going into vape shops and buying stuff, or going online and buying stuff, that's on the person willing to sell it to them, or on the adult willing to give them the product, who could have just been some other 18-year-old kid who was just barely legal.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from the ages of 14 up until 18, it was just my older friends.
Yeah, it's an adult. There's an adult in there involved somewhere, and it's not the parents, because somebody broke the law to give that product to that underage kid. So ultimately, it comes down to the adults who are giving that product. And is it usually, and here's the thing, is it usually a vape shop? No. 9 times out of 10, it's not. It's some other teenager manning a counter at the local, gas station on the corner. That's how they're getting it. But it's still, you can't sit there and say, well, parents should parent, or your parents are being lazy. You can be the most conscientious in their life helicopter parent and not know what your teens are doing. Come on, guys. You were smokers when you were teens. Don't tell me you got away with stuff without your parents knowing about it.
I smoked openly. I can still hear my mom telling me you need to quit smoking.
Yeah. So
when I was 15 years old, I do really want to address this really quick. And I get how easy this is to do, to fall into that. Well, we could just blame the lazy parents, again, this goes back to my point about education, these institutions, schooling, where kids are, they're receiving all of this bad information as well. So even if parents are lazy, there are other places where our kids go to get educated that are failing them. So it's not just lazy parents or this, that, or the other parents. This is policy.
Yeah, and yeah, so I mean, you can't. And again, that comes back to our earlier discussion about how about enforcing the stuff that you've already passed, Tobacco 21, which I don't think is going to work because kids are going to kid. Teens are going to get a hold of stuff no matter how they already can get
They're already
marijuana.
drinking.
Yeah, any drug they want, any alcohol.
I had 30
they can
packs,
already
and
get it.
I would be equipped on a Friday night with 30 packs of Keystone Light and bare minimum 2 packs of Newports and or Marb Reds.
Yeah,
When I was real young, I flipped between menthols and reds. So I mean, again,
you're not making any friends from the opposition by putting that out there. And the people who are passing these laws and stuff, we say, the parents, blame the parents. They don't blame us, blame the parents. They're going to look at you like, what? We're trying to help the parents protect their kids from you. So it's just not going to ring true at all. And even though we know that they're not usually getting this stuff directly from the vendor, and that might be a better argument, that look at these studies, most of these kids are getting it from either friends, family, or somebody older who's buying it illegally. You can't legislate your way out of that. You just can't.
They will continue to try. They've been trying to legislate their way out of a lot of things for a long time.
So we got a couple more. If we
can want us to keep going, are we okay?
I get it.
I know it's getting late.
Wrap this up. I mean, this is the last little bits here are arguably the most complicated because they are political leaning specific. And I cannot say that I have the best handle on all of the parsing arguments based on political persuasion. But I think really quickly, I think, we have found more allies on the right than the left. And a lot of what I think Matt had said this, and I think one of the things that I've sort of believed for a long time is that people on the left actually agree with us. They just don't know it yet.
That's a good point, yeah.
And so, the arguments that appeal to the right are very much the, protecting small business. This is a legal product and adults should be able to make a choice.
You mentioned economic impact earlier.
Right. The products they consume and also the economic impact. So, it's really not hard to nail those down as far as what appeals to the right. But on the left, we do have a lot of work to do to appeal to Democrat lawmakers. And one of the points that Matt brought up, and I think that we are all sort of moving toward, is talking about this as a social justice issue. In particular, this is about access to safer alternatives is vital for underserved communities, in particular, people with mental health and behavioral disorders, substance use disorders, low to middle income communities, and generally anyone who works in the food, beverage, and hospitality industry. That's my little PSA for you.
That's so true, though. My whole family was in restaurant hospitality, and I think we all ended up smoking.
I know so many people that didn't smoke before they got a job at a restaurant and like picked it up just so they could go outside and take a 5.
Absolutely. So I think that the next point here, it sort of dovetails on this, is that progressives are very fond of this sort of David versus Goliath narrative, and that they are standing up for the Davids of the world. And so, my 2 cents on all of this has been to say that the progressives and liberals and people on the left have sort of misidentified the David and the Goliath in all of this. To them, Davids are the kids. That's very easy. That's Captain Obvious has pointed that out plenty of times. And of course, the Goliath are these, multi-billion-dollar tobacco companies. The reality of the situation is Goliath is the spectacle of public health versus tobacco companies. The Davids in the world are the vape shop owners and the consumers that support them. usually referred to as the vaping community. We are the ones. We are the primary stakeholders in this, not the kids, not the parents unless they smoke. The primary stakeholders in this debate are people who smoke, people who quit smoking by switching to alternatives, and people who would like to quit smoking. We are the ones that actually matter in all of this, and we're the ones being crushed by the policies and the arguments against us, not against tobacco companies. They're coming after us. And so I don't exactly know how we sort of reset the narrative here, but I guess if I could wish on a genie in a bottle, I wish that overnight opponents to tobacco harm reduction could more correctly identify the David and Goliath story. And so I mentioned this earlier, and I'll just read what I wrote here. As Matt mentioned, the David and Goliath narrative appeals to the left, which is not really unique to the left. But in the case of vaping and THR, the characters are being misidentified. Goliath is a spectacle of public health versus Philip Morris, and David is the vapor industry and the consumers who support it, and probably the children, which you have to spell with 3 I's. We've been trying to flip the script for at least a decade now, but a lack of success here doesn't mean we abandon the truth. It just means it's a slow burn that somebody important will feel in their back pocket, hopefully soon. So,
well, I think one way everybody wants to give you a standing ovation in the chat. See, here you go. I'm gonna give you a few little things there. Here you go. Here's another one. I think one thing that could help with that is for us to stop pointing to big tobacco as being that Goliath. Just that, because we argue all the time. Now, I say we as far as the community, I see it all the time that, oh, big tobacco's behind this, big tobacco's behind this. It's all big tobacco. And because they don't understand who the real opposition is, that they're so focused on big tobacco as being the enemy, because essentially we're brainwashed since we were little kids from the tobacco control industry or complex or whatever you want to call it, that big tobacco was the enemy. And that's where a lot of people first jump into when they hear stuff's getting banned and all that kind of stuff. They think big tobacco is behind it. And they jump on that. And I see it on Facebook posts all the time when I post things for CASAA. And they're like, oh, big tobacco is trying to ban it again. And it's like, no, and so we're kind of pushing that narrative along every time we join in and jump on big tobacco without, so we have to stop doing it ourselves. So I think that would help if we stop jumping on that narrative and agreeing with it that, yeah, big tobacco is the problem, and not mentioning tobacco control and it all, Am I making sense?
Yes. And I will say, I had a conversation with somebody recently, and a little light bulb went off in their head when I explained to them that, and this is also, I think, an antidote for or an alternative argument based on what you're saying here, which is, I had to explain to somebody that, what you hear in the media, the coverage of this issue is that, well, tobacco companies own the vapor industry now. Like, they just came in and took over everything. And that has actually never been true. Yes, like, Altria has a 31 or 32% share in Juul. They've inserted their own executives to run the company because the original founders didn't really fully understand what they were getting into. Reynolds has bought a couple of vapor companies, shops and distributors, whatever. That's just business. That's always going to happen. But they didn't gobble up the entire industry. Right. What's actually made it so that the larger companies are going to be the only ones selling the vapor products is, again, the policies. It's the policies and regulations that give the advantage to well-heeled industries that can afford the process. And so that, I think, is a much more constructive way of illustrating the imbalance here, and we don't have to make tobacco companies the enemy. We don't have to pretend to be on the side of the tobacco controllers, and we don't have to throw tobacco companies under the bus in order to get there. They're already under the bus, man. Right. Everybody knows that tobacco companies are the boogeyman. But they, as we have argued in the past, have a vital role to play in dispersing these harm reduction, making sure distributing these harm reduction products, putting them in the same places where cigarettes are sold. I want to see the views directly compete with other cigarettes that are sold by
right on the
Reynolds.
same rack.
That
Right.
may not be a very warm and fuzzy discussion around the boardroom table, but that's what they have to do. That's what they need to do. And
if you're going to get them to stop selling cigarettes, you have to let them sell something else.
Exactly. And you have to allow for the competition from the smaller companies. It's the diversity, it's the homegrown industry that took the fight to tobacco companies' doorstep. The industry is actually capable of hitting tobacco companies in the wallet, which is what all of this policy and regulation was intended to do. But instead of actually doing that, it's just given them a safe harbor. And now, of course, the first vapor product authorized for sale by the FDA under these regulations is made by R.J. Reynolds.
Right. Yeah.
Who would have saw
and
that?
It was their, right. And it was their policies, their efforts, the tobacco control's efforts. That is what made that happen. Exactly. All their griping about flavors guaranteed that it was going to be a tobacco flavor that was covered, or that was authorized first. So yeah, we need to stop acting like big tobacco. Okay, the tobacco industry is not necessarily our friends as far as if you're a vape shop and they're competing with you on that front. But if consumers keep saying the boogeyman is big tobacco, then we're only bolstering the tobacco control's argument that all these policies have to be put in, and that because the tobacco industry is so joined in or infiltrated the vape industry, that really we're fighting. When we're fighting vape stuff, we're fighting big tobacco. But every time we blame big tobacco, we're just bolstering tobacco control's fight against us. So that's why we need to stop that.
You're reminding me of something else, which is not really a specific argument here, but I know that you've talked about this a lot over the years. It's probably one of the earliest things I heard when I was appointed to the board of CASAA, and even just being a volunteer, which was be careful about some of the arguments that we're presenting or some of the science that we're using. Rather than advocating on our behalf, we're actually validating the nonsense that some of this stuff is saying. Yeah. And so I think specific examples were, of course, secondhand smoke, of course, and as Kristin highlighted, as we've talked about those that has been applied to vaping, and all of those arguments that you think are going to be productive actually end up just validating them and working against us.
And something just popped in my head. This is one of the cases where the enemy of our enemy is not our friend. It's not, because if you consider big tobacco to be our enemy and tobacco control is their enemy, and you think that's going to be our friend, they're not. They're equally our enemy, and I would argue that tobacco control is a much bigger enemy to us than big tobacco is. Much, much, much bigger.
I
really, it's the other way around. We should be looking the enemy of our enemy as our friend. Big tobacco is more of our friend because tobacco control is both our enemy. That's how they see us. They need to understand that.
Yeah, and I just a little bit of sort of correcting that perception, of course, is what we've been saying. I'll say it again. The tobacco companies absolutely have a role to play in this harm reduction movement. They need to be part of this. That is probably the most efficient way to get these products in the hands of people who can benefit from them. And really, I guess if we're picking enemies, it's probably a lot of these people working for marketing agencies that are actually the enemy here. These are the people that are making decisions about the messages. They're talking about how to promote them, how to craft them. It's lobbying firms, it's marketing people, it's lawyers. They're the folks that are doing it. They're just doing a job. They show up to work. This is what they're trained to do. I'm sure that some of them actually believe in the movement that they were behind, but for the most part, these people are just getting paid to do what their job is, and that is make a compelling argument that is going to appeal to people's base instincts And everybody with you can read the message in 30 seconds and get it and take it to your next dinner party and tell people how against tobacco you are. That's the enemy.
And if just a I don't know, piggyback off that. Have you ever seen the movie Thank You for Smoking?
Oh yeah, many.
It's a really good demonstration of this. The movie, the title is a little misleading. I mean, it is about smoking, but it's more about lobbyists and lobbying than it really is about smoking.
Yeah.
So just to kind of, if anybody's ever seen that, or if you haven't seen that yet, and you kind of want to see what Alex means by, it's lobbyists, like watch that movie. It's actually really good.
Oh yeah, it's excellent.
I don't remember when it came out, but it is pretty good.
90s.
Yeah, I've seen it. Okay, so Ian Thomas says, side note, if U.S. smoking rates are declining, what is the current death rate from smoking? 480K has been touted for years. I think that's down to 385 now.
I don't know. First of all, that number is an overestimation. Yes. Second of all, when
it includes all the people who died from secondhand smoke.
I got involved in all of this I joined the board in 2014. And just prior to that was the 50th anniversary of the Surgeon General's report on smoking and health. And they noted during that anniversary that the reason that the number hasn't really gone down is because they're finding that there are many more diseases attributable to smoking. And they added some things to that list. And so there were more people included in that. Now, look, we say that, that 480,000 number, it's not entirely made up, but it is pretty much an estimate. That's not a real number.
Well, especially because it includes secondhand smoke deaths, which is estimated to be about 30 or 40,000 of that, usually around 30,000 of that. And that's a completely made up number because there is no, they don't track people who died from secondhand smoke. So they have no way of knowing that.
And of course, there's sort of this crisis of reporting where, I fully expect that, when I die, I'm going to be logged as someone who died because of a smoking attributable disease. And so, even if that isn't really the cause, it's just, if you have a history of smoking, you get counted as a dead smoker. Right. And so that's another reason for why the number is not really going down at all. It looks like we lost Logan, but he's still here.
He had to go. He said he'd be right back.
Okay.
I think really quick, because I think we're getting towards the end. So sort of recap. Let's do kind of a recap, because a lot of these have come out saying, don't say this, don't say this, don't say this.
Right.
So let's try to do a really quick recap of what you maybe would be better arguments to use. So we started off on the MSA instead of MSA. It's kind of like that those videos, don't eat this, eat that. Let's do don't say this, say that.
Right.
So rather than MSA, we could talk about.
It's the fact that the state already has the funding and does not spend it in the way it has been advised to spend it. This is particularly useful in arguments about taxation. The point is, rather than trying to come up with additional revenue sources to fund tobacco control programs, which is usually what the money is dedicated to in this legislation, it's worth reminding the state that it already takes in millions of dollars from tobacco taxes, in addition to whatever it gets from the master settlement agreement. Also, just to recap, it's a separate kind of initiative, if you will. I'm not spearheading it, but this idea that states should routinely disclose when discussing new tobacco policies, the amount of money that they take in based on cigarette sales. That's tax revenue and MSA disbursements. That's all income. And it should be clearly stated what that money is funding before considering new regulations on smoke-free alternatives. Period. Whether it's a tax bill or a public health bill, that income to the state should be disclosed as a potential conflict of interest.
Right. And I suggested another argument that could be made is that they haven't given the laws that have been passed a chance yet.
Right.
To actually work.
If you believe in it, fully fund it.
Yeah, and if you believe in fully fund it, and start implementing it. Start, what's the word I'm looking for? Enforcing it. Start enforcing this stuff and give people the tools to do it, but enforce it. And then we went on to the. Did you have are we doing a recap?
No,
or
I was going to keep going with the recap. Yeah.
Okay. And then the next thing was.
So I think I can do this really quickly. Whataboutisms, the antidote for whataboutisms is more focusing on the policy. Focus on the policy. Focus on the policy outcomes. If the policies are leading to bad or mediocre outcomes, then let's talk about it. If we know that policies applied to certain other issues of substance use are failing, that's what needs to be highlighted, not what are you going to do about this other thing that's really dangerous. It's all about the policy. And then the last point I think that Matt brought up and we discussed, well, it's not the last point, but this, sort of playing the blame game with parents. Again, this is an issue of policy. It also includes education and providing parents with the resources they need to have a constructive and useful conversation with their kids about substance use. And then, of course,
and again, that comes back to enforcement too, because if you're going to say, well, kids are getting their hands on these things, again, that comes back to enforcement. Parents can't stop these places from selling stuff.
I will say, we kind of got to thread the needle on that one too, with enforcement, because a lot of people are inclined to say, well, yeah, you got to punish the kids who break the law.
Oh yeah, no, that's not what I meant. Definitely.
Well, I know, and I just want to make sure that we are being clear about that we don't advocate for possession use and purchase use and possession laws. We advocate against them because that is, again, more drug war, fear and punishment based policy that does not work. And there are many states, many states that still have pup laws, and vapors being folded into those pup laws, and we really shouldn't expect any different outcomes.
You end up like the boardwalk incident. I mean, it's
exactly.
Yeah, no, we don't agree with that.
So
yeah,
that was not
the parents. But you could say
one of Matt's points, but
right. Yeah, and then the other one was businesses going in and talking about your business and how you're losing money. It's probably better to take that from a different standpoint of saving lives. Get your customers to show up. Get them to do testimonials on our website.
I missed a point I wanted to make about this. You remind me of this in talking about the shop owners. Shop owners do have a really important story to tell. Most of the shop owners that we've interacted with are people who quit smoking by switching to vaping, and that's why they went into business.
It's important to tell that story. Yeah.
So, you're
not a big tobacco outlet.
As we are, encouraging shop owners to get involved and bring their customers into these hearings if they can. As we've noted, people have jobs during the day. They're not always available for committee hearings, so don't be so hard on people.
Especially when they're all on a Tuesday at 2 p.m.
Exactly. But shop owners themselves have their own personal stories about their motivations for going into business. And I think that's very, very important for businesses to bring up.
Yeah. Like you said, read the room. So it depends on if they're all talking about, if you go up and they've been talking about taxes and revenue and all that kind of stuff, might be good to say, hey, my business brings in X amount of dollars. If we're talking about save the kids, come up and say, look, this saved my life. You have the option of doing both. And coming off more as being, you can choose to come up and approach things as either a business owner or consumer, because most of you guys are consumers too. So, and most of you got into this business because it was saving your life. So that's a very important story to tell. So say that instead, maybe. And then the last thing.
So the last thing was, arguments tailored to political persuasions. Again, we need to flip the script on the David and Goliath narrative. And of course, focusing on how people from underserved communities actually smoke at disproportionately higher rates, and they absolutely deserve honest information about safer alternatives, and of course, access. And so that, I think, wraps up the recap. But
something just occurred to me because you're talking about David and Goliath, and Bloomberg popped into my head. So do you think it's a valid, or is that too? I mean, he's very open about the fact that he's spending all that money, So do you think it's a valid argument to make to kind of put us more in that David camp of saying, look, we barely have any money to fight all these laws, and we're fighting against things like Bloomberg's millions, and he donated X amount of dollars, which is public knowledge. It's in the news. It's, nobody, it's not like, can't be a conspiracy theory or whatever. A lot of people might have heard of that. So how do you feel about that?
I mean, look, this is the only job I've ever had where my salary is actually just public information. Well, I guess that's not true, but whatever, like we have to disclose what we get paid. We disclose what we take in. It's not a lot, folks. And we do accept money from tobacco companies. We accept money from vapor companies. We accept money from anybody who agrees with our mission. And so, but what people may not realize is that that's a one-way conversation. And it goes like this. The donor says, how do I give you money? And we say, here's all the information you need. Thank you. We appreciate your support. That's it. There are no meetings about how we need to craft our talking points to suit their agenda. Absolutely not. I have never had a conversation with anybody at a tobacco or vapor company. Actually, I'd probably be more likely to have a conversation with somebody at a vapor company than a tobacco company about what we are supposed to say and what position we're supposed to take. Absolutely never had that conversation. I have only ever had industry people say, here's what we're thinking. I know this may not jive with what you're doing, but just wanted to kind of let you know and see where you stand on that. That's it. No, we have never been pressured to accept a particular policy position ever, except for probably people in the vapor industry. But other than that,
Bloomberg's money comes with a whole lot of strings attached.
Exactly. And it comes with a whole lot of money too. I mean, I don't know that I can go through that hypothetical and say, well, I guess if somebody paid me $1 million, I would still reject it. I don't know. No one's ever offered to pay me $1 million. So I can't honestly say that. But, just to be clear, we're not taking marching orders from tobacco or vapor companies. And I think that's probably well reflected in the money that we take in.
Unfortunately, yeah.
This is a shoestring grassroots operation. I don't know what PAVE makes, but I would be willing to wager that they take in more money than we do from individual, from Bloomberg people, and
they probably pay their board members too, I bet.
Even if they don't give them money, they've lifted them up, to national exposure. It was PAVE through the lobbying efforts of the body parts groups and campaign to go get a seat in front of a committee in Congress. No one came to ask the real consumers about this. The closest we got to that was Vicki McKenna. She's a conservative radio talk show host.
Hey, in Wisconsin, be nice.
Whatever. She doesn't represent all of us. I'm not saying I would have done a good job, but it's like, the regular people, the only regular people in that hearing were the kids.
Yeah.
So anyway, this has almost been 3 hours. I'm glad that we were able to kind of break all this down and drill into some of the nuances. And I'm sure there's some arguments that we missed. If you want, leave a comment in the comment section. And maybe we'll come back to this at a later time. This is a really interesting topic. Obviously, this has been going on for a couple of weeks here at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the legislative session. It's good at the beginning of the session that we're getting armed with more credible arguments and talking points.
Right.
And hopefully some of this will land. That none of this has been presented as like, this is going to be a slam dunk. They're going to be on our side after you say this. Not at all. Again, I'll reset the table here and say this is a long haul kind of effort. We're in this for another 10 years at least. And hopefully with the acceleration of discoveries and research and science and technology and all of these things, we don't have to wait 10 years. I would love for at some point this year, somebody of high stature comes out and says, I am changing my opinion on all of this vaping stuff and tobacco harm reduction. I just watched my kid go back to cigarettes, following all of your advice, adhering to the policies and promoting them and all of this stuff. It's not productive. It's actually harming people, and we need to give harm reduction a chance. That is entirely
come on, Raja, where you at?
Yeah, exactly. Where are his kids? I mean, we got to be messing around.
Flip a few opinions out there.
And we just, and I'm sorry this did go long tonight. It's just that because this is sort of our mission, is helping inform people and helping you guys advocate for yourselves. We didn't want to just come into this and just kind of pile on the don't do this thing without giving options. It's kind of our job to make sure that you guys have help you stay stuff. And if you guys need help with anything, if you're trying to go into a meeting or do whatever, we're here for you in any way we can be to help you write stuff up or guide you to things that we already have on our website, whatever it is you need, because that's what we do. We're here to help educate people on the truth about these alternatives, and that includes our own members who often don't know the whole story themselves. So
yeah, and if you ever have questions like this, if you're going into a meeting or whatever it may be, tag us on Twitter. Tag CASAA Media on Twitter. Tag Alex. I mean, all of our handles are up on screen right now as well.
It's up on Facebook, Messenger.
A lot of us are on Twitter pretty regularly throughout the day, and things like that. So yeah, if you've got questions, if you've got something coming up, you've got a meeting tomorrow, and you're wondering some talking points, how to present certain things, whether or not you think an argument is good, or maybe you want to refine it. If we can help with that, tag us, add us, let us know. We're absolutely happy to help you be better prepared.
One last word, and then we'll wrap this up with Logan's spiel here.
Spiel.
I will say, generally speaking, first of all, we're all new to this. The only seasoned veterans of this government relations work that I've met are lobbyists and think tank people, folks who were on this career path already. They have a lot of wisdom and background and experience, but they're even new to this as well. Anybody that's ever had to train up a lobbyist knows. Anybody that's ever seen a lobbyist sort of fail miserably in talking points in a committee hearing, particularly in California, it knows that this takes some time. And so just be easy with one another. There's no reason to go out and shout people down who are continuing to make these arguments. It is really, I will speak from my personal experience. This is a lack of experience. And we are all new to this. And so be patient with your fellow advocates and try to carry some of that patience into our day-to-day advocacy efforts. People don't like being called on the carpet. People don't like being talked down to, or this gotcha stuff. It makes for great TV, but it doesn't really make for good coalition building and resolving problems. So be easy and take care of one another. And thank you all. Thank you, Logan and Kristin, for this excellent discussion. Thank you, everybody in chat, for participating. And like I said, if you guys think of any more weird arguments that just aren't landing properly, drop it in the chat. And we'll try to do another one of these sometime, I'm sure.
This might garner a blog post too. Might be a say this, not that type of blog post. Might not be a bad thing.
Sure.
Cool.
Cheers to you. Thanks you guys for showing up.
All right. That's going to do it.
Get a thing, so.
2 hours and 51 minutes.
Awesome.
We were long this week, but it's an important topic.
We have to have one more topic here because we haven't made it to 3 hours.
No. Let's go.
All right, you guys. Thank you again. Just like Alex said, thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting CASAA and supporting harm reduction, supporting people, supporting each other. If you are not yet a CASAA member, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but you're doing it wrong. Become a CASAA member. It's absolutely free. Just head over to CASAA.org. I'm sorry, you guys. But do it for real. Become a member. If you're not and you're here right now, leave and go become a member immediately. It's absolutely free. Share your story in our testimonial page. We've got like 13,000 plus. We're well on our way to 1 million, but we can't do it without you. So please go head over to CASAA.org and do all the things. Do we have something call to action that you want to highlight really quick before the end?
Sometimes no, I don't think so.
Okay, cool. I'll move swiftly along then.
Yeah.
For podcast listeners, there will be 2 episodes available. They're basically the same thing, but one is a shorthand version of just the legislative rundown with all of those early heads ups that Alex gave today, all that word of mouth, inside scoop kind of stuff. It's not really an inside scoop, but all those calls to action, heads up that Alex talked about during the legislative rundown will be available in a short version, and then the full version, this 2 hours and 53 minutes now version, will be available to you as well. Check out our merch. Danielle Jones, our board president, worked really hard on some new merchandise, some new designs. They're really cool. So go get yourself some swag. That's also a really great way to support us. As far as donating, things like that go, merch is a really cool way to do that. And you get a cool nifty t-shirt or whatever, whatever suits your style. And I think that's it. I think that's it for my spiel. We're back next week, right?
I believe so.
Well,
Okay.
I know.
I haven't heard nobody's had any
I'm not sure if my grandbaby is coming to visit, so we'll find that out. And so maybe we'll have a guest host, or maybe just be you two guys next week. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, me and Alex can't do this show on our own.
I might have to see my grandbaby though. Well, maybe I'll bring her on the show. I don't know.
There you go. Save
you guys,
the children.
Everybody have a good week.
You can literally present a child when you're like, we're saving the children. Right. This one right here.
Oh, jeez.
All right, everybody. Take care of each other. Be excellent to each other. Be safe out there. And we will be back next week, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 over on the other coast. You know, the deal. You got to figure it out for anywhere in between. Yeah. 3:30 where?
Where I am. Central.
Yeah. Where Kristin is. You got to do a where in the world is Kristin to figure out that. But there you go. All right, everybody. We're out of here. Take care of each other. We'll see you next week.
Bye.